County Road 410 was practically deserted that time of year, and especially at night. We drove for what felt like forever, the headlights cutting through absolute blackness on either side, just trees and the occasional flicker of eyes reflecting back from the woods, deer, probably. We finally found the spot, not a proper campsite, more like a pull-off someone had cleared out near the reservoir. It was nothing fancy, but it was isolated. Exactly what we wanted. We got the tent up, fumbled around in the dark with the poles and pegs. Sophia was freezing, complaining already, but trying to keep it light. We had brought just the basics: sleeping bags, some food, a lantern, and stupidly, I'd packed my old .22 Magnum. Thought maybe we'd see some rabbits, do some plinking during the day, or just... Well, honestly, it was mostly for the feeling of security. Stupid in hindsight. The quiet was thick when we finally settled in. Real quiet. The kind that buzzes in your ears after the city noise. We ate some sandwiches, drank lukewarm coffee, and just talked, mostly about nothing important, about work, about our families, about stuff we always talked about. It was normal, peaceful, like we'd hoped. The kind of night where you think, yeah, this is good, this is what we needed. We went to sleep maybe around 11. I remember looking at my watch before turning off the lantern. Everything was still, just the rustle of leaves outside the tent in the breeze, and the distant sound of water from the reservoir, a low, constant hum. It was cold, even in the sleeping bags, but we were warm enough. I drifted off pretty fast. Then it happened. It wasn't gradual, it was just... there. A sound that ripped through the quiet like tearing fabric. A scream, not human. That's the first thing that registered. Not like anyone I'd ever heard scream before, not in a movie, not in a fight, not ever. It was high, piercing, like metal scraping on metal, but mixed with agony. Pure, raw agony, and something else, something feral underneath. It was wrong, deeply, fundamentally wrong. It came from just outside the tent. Sophia bolted upright next to me, her breath catching in her throat. I felt my own heart hammering against my ribs, a cold fist squeezing my chest. We just froze, listening, paralyzed by the sheer, unadulterated terror of that sound. It came again, louder this time, more intense. It was definitely coming closer, or maybe it just felt like it. I fumbled for the zipper on the tent door, my hands shaking so bad I could barely grip the fabric. Sophia was breathing in short, ragged gasps beside me. I could feel her trembling. What is that?" she whispered, voice tight and strained. I didn't answer. I didn't have an answer. My mind was blank except for the scream, that awful, piercing sound that felt like it was vibrating in my bones. I unzipped the tent flap, just enough to peek out. Darkness, just absolute impenetrable darkness beyond the faint glow of the lantern inside the tent. The trees were black shapes against a slightly less black sky. Nothing moving that I could see. But the screaming. It was all around us now, not just from one direction. It was like we were surrounded. Stupidly, I grabbed the .22 from beside my sleeping bag. It was all I had, and in that moment, it felt like the only thing standing between us and whatever was out there. I'm not a hero, never been in a real fight in my life, but adrenaline does things to you. Stupid things. I told Sophia, voice croaky, barely audible, "Stay here, lock the zipper." She grabbed my arm, nails digging into my skin. "No, don't go out there." "I have to do something," I said, even though I had no idea what something was supposed to be. Maybe scare it off, make it go away, protect us. It all sounds ridiculous now, but then, in that moment of pure animal fear, it felt almost logical. Insane logic, but logic nonetheless. I pushed past her, unzipped the tent all the way, and scrambled out into the cold night. The air hit me like ice water. The screams were deafening now, coming from all around, from the trees, from the darkness. It felt like they were right on the edge of the clearing, just beyond the circle of our weak lantern light. I raised the .22, aiming it vaguely upwards into the black canopy of trees, and pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot was sharp, shockingly loud in the still night air. It echoed, bounced off the trees, and for a split second there was a weird kind of silence. A tiny, almost hopeful pause. And then the screams started again. But they were different. They were louder, much louder, and angrier. That's the only word for it. The agony was still there, the piercing quality, but now there was something else woven into it. Rage, pure, unadulterated, blinding rage. It felt personally directed at us, at me, like I had done something wrong, something incredibly, terribly wrong. The screams were closer now. I could hear thrashing in the undergrowth, branches snapping, leaves rustling violently. It was moving. Whatever it was moving towards us, fast. Terror, real, soul-deep terror flooded me. My legs went weak. I wanted to run, to scream myself, but I was frozen, rooted to the spot. The .22 felt useless, pathetic, a child's toy against whatever was making those sounds. I turned, stumbled back to the tent, fumbling with the zipper again. Sophia was there, her face pale and streaked with tears, eyes wide with absolute stark fear. "We have to go," I choked out. "Now, we have to get out of here." She didn't argue, didn't even hesitate. She was already scrambling out of her sleeping bag, pulling on her shoes, grabbing her jacket. We were moving in a weird, silent, panicked ballet. Years of being together, I guess. We didn't need to speak. We both knew instinctively we were in real, serious danger. "The tent," she started to say, but I cut her off. "Forget the tent. Forget everything. Just the car. We just need to get to the car." We started throwing things into the car, blindly, frantically. Sleeping bags, backpacks, the lantern, anything we could grab. It was chaos, pure, unadulterated chaos in the dark. Our hands were shaking so badly we could barely function. Zippers jammed, buckles wouldn't close, everything seemed to fight against us. And all the time, the screams were getting closer, circling us, filling the air with that horrific, maddening sound. I could feel them now, not just hear them. A vibration in the air, a pressure in my chest. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, not just watched, but scrutinized, judged, hated, like we were being studied by something ancient and malevolent, something that saw us, truly saw us, and despised everything about us. We got the car unlocked, threw everything in the back, and scrambled into the front seats. I jammed the key into the ignition, my hands slipping, fumbling again. Come on, come on, come on. The engine finally turned over, coughed and roared to life. I slammed the car into reverse, tires spinning in the dirt and gravel, and backed out of the pull-off. We lurched forward onto County Road 410, tires squealing as I jammed my foot on the gas. We sped down the road, the headlights bouncing wildly, illuminating the trees rushing past on either side. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see something chasing us, some shape in the darkness. But there was nothing, just the road stretching out behind us, swallowed by the black night. But the screams, they were still there. Not as loud now, but still there. Fainter, echoing from the woods, chasing us, pursuing us down the road. They didn't stop, not right away. They went on for what felt like miles. Miles of black road, rushing trees, and those awful receding but still present screams. Sophia was silent beside me, huddled into herself, staring straight ahead, her face white, drawn tight with fear. I didn't speak either. There was nothing to say. We were both just trying to get away, to get as far away as possible from that place, from that sound, from whatever the hell had made it. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, the screams faded. They became whispers on the wind, then just silence. Again. But not the same silence as before. This silence was heavy, oppressive, filled with the aftertaste of terror. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was just empty. We drove all night. Didn't stop until we were miles and miles away, back in the outskirts of the city, in the pre-dawn greyness of a strip mall parking lot. We just sat there in the car, parked under a flickering streetlight, shivering, exhausted, and utterly shaken. We haven't talked about it much since then. Not really talked, anyway. We've mentioned it in short, clipped sentences. To each other, mostly bird. Something else entirely. I've looked online, read stories about weird sounds in the woods, unexplained phenomena. Nothing fits. Nothing comes close to that sound, that feeling. I don't have an explanation, and I don't think I ever will. All I know is we went camping near Wills Creek Reservoir that night, and something in those woods didn't want us there. Something that screamed with a rage I've never encountered before and never want to again. We got away. But sometimes, when the wind blows just right and the house is quiet, I swear I can still hear it, echoing faintly from the dark woods, even now. Just a whisper, a ghost of a scream, but enough to send a cold shiver down my spine and remind me. Some nights the woods are not a place you want to be, especially not after dark, especially not when they start to scream. Story 2. I swear I don't know what else to do or who else to tell. Maybe writing it down here just for someone to read will help a little, even if it's just to feel less alone with this thing. It's been eating me up inside for months now. I can't sleep properly anymore. Food tastes like ash. Every shadow jumps out at me. I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, terrified for my son, for my little dog, for everything. It all started 9 months ago, and it changed my whole life. I ended up quitting my job, sold my house by the lake, the place I loved, my sanctuary. I packed everything and ran to Knoxville just to get away. But even here, miles away, the fear, it's still there. It's always there, a knot in my stomach, a cold hand gripping my heart. It was September 2016, about 2:30 in the morning. I was driving back from the children's hospital in Knoxville. My boy, Raoul, he was just 2 then. He'd fallen and hurt his leg pretty badly. Nothing broken, thankfully, just a nasty gash that needed stitches. He was so brave, my little man. But being in the emergency room all night had worn us both out. We were almost home, just a few miles to go, on Powell Valley Marina Road. It was one of those nights where the fog just blankets everything, thick, white, and suffocating. It was late summer, but that fog made it feel cold, damp. Visibility was terrible. I was taking it slow, headlights cutting weakly through the murk. I glanced back at Raoul in his car seat. He was starting to fuss, little whimpers escaping his lips. To keep him awake, I started singing softly, a silly little tune about a dog chasing its tail. He usually loved it, but this time he didn't giggle or babble along. He just went silent. Then, his little voice, so small and innocent, cut through the quiet of the car. "Mommy," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "Monster." My heart skipped a beat. Kids say the darndest things, right? Probably just tired, maybe a bad dream starting to bubble up. I was about to reassure him, to tell him there were no monsters, just shadows playing tricks on us in the fog, when I looked to my right, toward the passenger side of my pickup truck, and that's when I saw it. Beside the front fender, in the sickly yellow glow of my headlights filtering through the fog, was it, a creature. No other word for it. Monster was closer to the truth than I ever wanted to believe. It was huge, towering over the hood of my truck. I mean absolutely massive, and hairy, covered in thick, matted black hair. It was humanoid in a way, but twisted, wrong, like someone had taken the shape of a man and stretched it, contorted it, and covered it in fur from head to toe. My eyes locked on its eyes. That's what I remember most vividly. Even in that dim light, they burned. 2 points of amber, glowing with, I don't know what. Intelligence? Malevolence? Just raw, primal awareness. They were fixed on me, piercing through me. I felt a jolt of pure, unadulterated terror shoot through my veins, like ice water flooding my system. I slammed on the brakes, tires screeched on the asphalt, the truck skidded, shuddering violently. I didn't even realize I was screaming until the sound tore from my own throat. Time seemed to warp. Everything slowed down, stretched and distorted. I was frozen, paralyzed by fear, staring into those burning eyes. It stared back. Then the smell hit me. God, that smell. I'll never forget it. It was like, imagine the worst thing you've ever smelled, then multiply it by 1,000. Putrid, foul, like rotting meat left in the sun for days. But worse, there was something else, something underneath that stench of decay. A sweetness, sickeningly sweet, like overripe fruit mixed with something metallic, something dead. It was stronger than skunk spray, stronger than anything rotting garbage could produce. It filled the cab of the truck instantly, suffocating, nauseating. I gagged, instinctively holding my breath. I could see Raoul in the rearview mirror, his little face scrunched up, coughing, eyes watering. And yet, through the terror, through the stench that felt like it was burning my nostrils and coating my tongue, I couldn't look away. We were locked in this horrible tableau, monster and terrified mother, in a truck swallowed by fog, bathed in the stench of death. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it moved. It took 2 strides, 2 massive, effortless strides, and it was across the road. It moved with an unnatural grace, a fluid, unsettling power that belied its bulk. It leaped over a high wooden fence that lined the side of the road like it was nothing, just a tiny hurdle in its path. And then it was gone, vanished into the fog and the darkness beyond, leaving only the lingering, gag-inducing smell and the echoing silence where its presence had been. The silence was broken by Raoul's little voice again. "Bye-bye, monster," he chirped, surprisingly cheerfully, like he was waving goodbye to a friendly dog, not a nightmarish creature that had just stolen my breath and quite possibly years off my life. I sat there, frozen behind the wheel, engine idling, headlights cutting through the fog that now seemed thicker, more menacing. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. My heart was pounding against my ribs like it was trying to escape my chest. I couldn't breathe properly. I was drenched in a cold sweat. Slowly, like moving through thick mud, I put the truck in gear and drove the rest of the way home. Every shadow, every rustle of leaves by the side of the road made me jump. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, expecting to see those glowing amber eyes in the darkness behind me. When we finally got home, I practically threw Raoul into bed. He was asleep within minutes, oblivious to the sheer horror his mother had just experienced. I, on the other hand, was wide awake. I paced through the house, every room suddenly feeling alien, hostile. The silence that had always been peaceful, comforting in my lakeside home now pressed down on me, heavy and ominous. Every creak of the house, every sigh of the wind through the trees outside, sounded like footsteps, like something moving closer. I checked every window, every door, locked them all again and again, even though I knew it wouldn't matter if it wanted to get in. What could a flimsy lock or a pane of glass do against something like that? I tried to tell people. The next day, I told my best friend, Sarah. She listened patiently, her expression slowly shifting from concerned to pitying. She squeezed my hand and told me I was probably just tired, stressed from Raoul's accident, that my mind was playing tricks on me. She suggested I get some rest, maybe take a day off work. Then I told my brother. He laughed, said I'd been watching too many scary movies, that the fog must have messed with my head. He made jokes about hillbillies in gorilla suits and swamp gas. He patted me on the shoulder, still chuckling, and told me to relax. Even the sheriff's deputy I talked to, after I finally decided I had to report it, just filed it as a possible wildlife sighting. He looked at me with that same kind of gentle disbelief, like I was a crazy lady seeing things. He wrote something down on his pad, mumbled about maybe sending someone out to patrol the area a bit more, and then left. Nobody believed me, nobody. It was like it hadn't happened, like it was all some elaborate hallucination. But it was real. I know what I saw. I smelled it. I felt the terror in every cell of my body. The house by Norris Lake, my beautiful home, turned into a prison. Every night was a nightmare. Every sound amplified in the darkness. Every shadow seemed to take on that monstrous shape. I couldn't sleep. I'd lie in bed, heart hammering, listening, waiting, convinced it was out there, watching me, waiting to come back. I lost my appetite. I was constantly on edge, jumpy, snapping at Raoul for no reason. I started seeing things in the corner of my eye, dark shapes moving in the shadows. I imagined that awful smell everywhere, even when it wasn't there. I couldn't live like that anymore. So I sold the house, took a new job in Knoxville, moved into a small apartment far from the lake, far from Powell Valley Marina Road. I thought getting away from that place would help. I thought distance would dilute the fear, make it fade. It hasn't. It's been months, and every night when the darkness closes in, I see those amber eyes again. I smell that sickening stench. I feel that cold, primal terror grip me all over again. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I hear something outside my window, a heavy tread, a low growl. I hold my breath, listening, my heart pounding. But there's nothing there. Just the city noises, the distant hum of traffic. But the fear, it's real. It's still real. I know what I saw on Powell Valley Marina Road that night, and I know deep down that whatever it was, whatever monster my son innocently waved goodbye to, it's still out there, somewhere, and that's a terror that no move, no distance, no amount of daylight seems to be able to erase. And the worst part is, I can't explain it. I can't make anyone understand. It just happened. And it changed everything, and I'm still here, haunted by something no one else seems to believe, forever looking over my shoulder. Story 3. It's still hard for me to talk about, even now. It was last spring, right when everything was flooding. We lived just outside Willow Creek, down by the Serpentine River, me and Jasper. It's always been quiet out here, just the sounds of the woods and the river mostly. We liked it that way. We have a couple of acres, woods all around, and the river runs along the back of our property. Spring hit hard last year. The rain just didn't stop for weeks, and the river started to swell like crazy. Before we knew it, the lower parts of our land were underwater, kind of marshy even further up than usual. We have 2 dogs, Old Bess and Duke. They're mutts, getting on in years, but they still get excited about dinner time. That evening, I remember it was properly dark already, even though it wasn't late, maybe 8 or so. The sky was completely clouded over, thick and heavy like a blanket. The air felt wet and close, and you could hear the river gurgling and rushing even louder than usual because of the flood. Jasper was inside, reading or something I don't remember, and I went out to feed the dogs like I always do. I grabbed their bowls, filled them up, and headed out onto the porch. Our porch light is pretty weak, just enough to see the steps and a bit of the yard right in front of the house. Beyond that, it was just black, real, thick, country dark. Bess and Duke were already on the porch, tails wagging, waiting for their food. I put their bowls down, and they started chowing down right away, like always. Normally, I'd stand there and watch them for a minute, maybe look at the stars if you could see them, just breathe in the night air. But that night, it felt different. Heavy, oppressive almost, and really, really quiet, except for the river and the dogs eating. Too quiet. The crickets and frogs, usually loud as anything out here at night, were completely silent. I started feeling uneasy, a prickle at the back of my neck. I couldn't explain it, just a gut feeling that something was wrong. I was about to turn and go back inside when I heard it. It wasn't loud, not at first, but it was low. A growl, deep and guttural, like something huge was forcing it out of its chest. It wasn't like any dog growl I'd ever heard. Not angry or playful, it was primal, something way older and darker than any dog. It came from the woods, just beyond the edge of where the porch light reached, right out in that blackness. My heart jumped into my throat. I froze. The dogs didn't even react at first. They were too busy eating, probably hadn't heard it over their own noises. But I heard it, clear as day. It sent a shiver of pure ice right through me. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there listening, trying to figure out what it was. Maybe a wild dog? But it didn't sound like any dog, too deep, too wrong. Then it came again, louder this time, more menacing, like whatever it was getting closer, or maybe just letting me know it was still there, watching. Bess and Duke finally stopped eating, heads up, ears pricked, looking towards the woods. They started to growl, their normal dog growls, much higher and yippier than what I'd just heard. But they were scared too, I could tell. Their tails were tucked and they were staying close to my legs. Fear hit me hard then, real, bone-deep fear. I didn't wait to hear it again. I didn't try to figure it out. I just turned and ran, stumbled back inside, practically slammed the door shut, and fumbled with the bolt, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get it to slide. Jasper was in the living room like I thought, reading. He looked up, startled, when I burst in. "Ilara, what is it? What's wrong?" he asked, seeing my face, seeing how freaked out I was. Something outside," I gasped, trying to catch my breath. "I heard, I don't know, a growl, like nothing I've ever heard, out by the woods." He frowned, setting his book down. "A growl? Probably just a raccoon or something, baby. You're jumpy." He tried to sound calm, reassuring, but I could see the concern in his eyes. He knows me. He knows I'm not usually this easily scared. "No, Jasper, you don't understand. It wasn't a raccoon. It was big, deep, scary." I was still shaking. My voice was trembling. And it growled again, louder. And the dogs, they heard it too. They were scared. He got up then, serious now. Okay. Let's go take a look. Maybe it was a deer, or a stray dog got loose." He grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen counter. "Come on." I didn't want to go back out there. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to stay inside, to lock the doors, to hide. But Jasper was going, and I couldn't just leave him to go out there alone if there really was something out there. We went back out onto the porch. He shined the flashlight out into the yard, towards the woods. The beam cut through the darkness, but it didn't reach very far, swallowed up by the blackness of the trees and the flooded ground. Bess and Duke were still on the porch, huddled together, whimpering softly. They wouldn't go down the steps, wouldn't even look towards the woods anymore. "See anything?" I whispered, my voice still shaky. Jasper was slowly sweeping the flashlight beam back and forth, across the yard, towards the trees. "Nothing yet. Maybe it was just your imagination, baby." He tried to smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. He was nervous too, I could tell. Then it came again, the growl. This time it was definitely closer, louder, and angrier somehow. It echoed through the quiet night, vibrating in the air, making the hair on my arms stand up. It was unmistakably coming from the woods, just beyond the tree line, maybe 50 feet away, maybe less. And this time, there was something else. Along with the growl, we heard a sound, a heavy thud, like something big stepping on the ground. Not just one thud, but several, rhythmic, heavy footfalls. Thump, thump, thump. They weren't running, but they were deliberate, powerful, like something huge was walking through the woods, coming closer. Jasper froze, flashlight beam fixed on the edge of the trees. His breath hitched. I grabbed his arm, squeezing it tight. My heart was pounding in my chest, so hard I could feel it throbbing in my ears. The dogs started to whine, low and desperate, pressing themselves against our legs. The growling stopped, but the heavy footsteps kept coming. Thump, thump, thump. Closer and closer. We strained our eyes, trying to see through the darkness, trying to see anything moving in the shadows. But the trees were too thick, the night too black. The flashlight beam just reflected back at us from the leaves and branches. The footsteps were right at the edge of the woods now, just beyond the last row of trees. We could hear them clearly, feel them even, vibrations through the ground under our feet. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded bipedal, like something walking on two legs, but too heavy, way too heavy to be a person, or any animal I could think of that would walk on two legs. Then silence. The footsteps stopped. The growling was gone, just the sound of the river rushing in the dark and our own ragged breathing. We stood there, frozen, for what felt like forever, staring into the woods, waiting for something to move, to growl, to step out of the shadows. But nothing did, just silence. Heavy, pregnant silence. Finally, Jasper slowly lowered the flashlight, his hand shaking a little. He looked at me, his face pale in the dim porch light. Did you hear that?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. I just nodded, unable to speak. My throat was tight with fear. My legs felt like they might give way beneath me. What was that?" he whispered again, looking back at the woods, still searching the darkness. It sounded huge. "I don't know," I managed to croak out. "I have no idea." My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. A bear? But bears don't growl like that, and they don't walk like that. A moose? Maybe. But the growling and the feeling of menace, it didn't feel like a moose. It felt something else, something darker, something wrong. We stayed out there for a few more minutes, listening, watching, but nothing happened. The silence stretched on, broken only by the river and the dog's soft whimpers. Finally, Jasper took my hand, his grip tight. "Come on, let's go inside, lock up tight." We backed inside, never taking our eyes off the woods. He bolted the door again, double-checked the windows. We went into the living room, and he turned on every light in the house. It felt a little safer, a little less vulnerable, with the house blazing with light. We sat down on the couch, the dogs huddled at our feet, still trembling. We didn't say anything for a long time, just sat there, listening, jumpy at every little creak and rustle of the wind outside. We tried to rationalize it, to explain it away. Maybe it was some kind of big cat, mountain lion, but we'd never heard of any around here. And those growls, they were just so inhuman, so wrong. The feeling of unease didn't go away. Not that night, not the next day, not ever since, really. We started being different, always looking over our shoulders when we went outside, jumpy at night, not sleeping as well. The dogs were different too, more anxious, always alert, ears pricked, staring into the woods. Then, a few days later, we saw Silas. He's an old guy, lives down the road, a hunter, knows the woods like the back of his hand. We were getting our mail at the end of the driveway, and he stopped to chat. We hadn't told anyone about what we heard. We felt stupid, like they'd think we were crazy. But somehow, the conversation turned to the flooding, and then to animals, and then, I don't know how, but it just came out. Jasper told him about the growls, the heavy footsteps. Silas listened, his face getting more and more serious. He didn't laugh, didn't scoff. He just listened, his eyes narrowed, thoughtful. When Jasper finished, Silas was quiet for a long moment, chewing on his lip. Then he said in this low, gravelly voice, "You know, that's kind of like something that happened to some fellas up by Crystal Lake a few weeks back. Crystal Lake isn't that far from us, maybe a half-hour drive, a popular spot for fishing and hunting." We looked at him, curious, a little nervous now. Silas went on, "These boys were duck hunting, out on the lake. Lake was still partly frozen, early in the season. They shot a goose, landed out on the ice. One of 'em, young fella, went out to get it, figured the ice was thin, so he walked around by the dam to get to the goose from the edge." Silas paused, took a breath. like he was remembering something that still scared him. He's out there by the goose, picking it up, and his phone rings. It's his buddy, back by the shore, and his buddy is yelling into the phone, frantic. "Get back here now, get back here now. There's something coming down the hill towards you." We were both leaning in now, hanging on his every word. Even the dogs seemed to sense the seriousness of the story. They were quiet and still, watching Silas intently. The boy's friend said he saw it from way up on the hill, across the lake. Something big, brown, moving fast, coming right for the fella on the ice. He said it wasn't a bear, said it was walking on two legs, big and brown, and walking upright, coming right for him. Silas stopped again, letting the silence hang in the air. We were both frozen, staring at him, our hearts pounding. The story was too similar. The heavy footsteps, the sense of something big and dark in the woods, the growls. The young fella, he didn't argue, didn't ask questions. He just grabbed that goose and ran back to shore as fast as he could, scared half to death. His buddy said whatever it was, it disappeared back into the woods before it got to the lake. But they were both spooked bad. Packed up their gear and left, didn't even finish their hunt. Silas looked at us, his eyes old and wise and a little sad. They said they never saw it clearly. Just a glimpse, big, brown, two legs. But they knew it wasn't natural, wasn't a bear, wasn't a deer, wasn't anything they'd ever seen before. He didn't say it was the same thing we heard. He didn't say he knew what it was. But he didn't dismiss us either. He told us that story like he believed it was real. Like he knew there were things out there in the woods that people didn't understand, things that were not right. We haven't heard the growls or the footsteps again since that night. But the feeling, that feeling of being watched, of something out there in the dark, it hasn't gone away. Sometimes at night when it's quiet and the wind is just right, I think I can still hear them, faint and far off, like a memory echoing in the woods. And I swear, sometimes, when I let the dogs out at night, they'll stop and look towards the trees, ears perked, and they'll let out this low, uneasy whine, like they can still sense it too. Like it's still out there, somewhere in the darkness, just beyond the edge of the light, waiting. And I still can't shake the feeling that whatever it was, whatever we heard that night, it was watching us. And maybe it still is. I really don't know what it was, and that's the scariest part. It's the not knowing, the feeling that there are things in this world that are just beyond understanding, lurking in the shadows, that keeps me up at night even now. Story 4. Okay, so I don't even know where to start with this. It feels weird even writing it down, putting it into words, you know? Like it's going to make it more real or something, even though it already happened. And trust me, it was real enough then. I still get the chills just thinking about it, even though it was months ago now. I guess that's why I'm typing this out. Maybe get it out of my head a little, I don't know. I've seen people online sharing their stories, weird stuff that happened to them, and it feels, I don't know, maybe someone out there gets it. Because nobody I know in real life really does. They just give you that look, you know, the polite, oh, that's interesting look, which is code for you're probably crazy. It was late, properly dark, like the kind of dark you only get when you're way out of town. I live out in Willow Creek, pretty far out actually, edge of the woods basically. It's quiet usually, too quiet sometimes. This night was one of those nights. Moon was out, big and bright, made everything kind of silvery, you know, but still dark in the shadows, properly dark. I had to top up the kerosene heater. Stupid thing drinks kerosene like it's water, but it's the only thing that properly warms up the den in winter, and even though it was fall, the nights were already getting cold. I keep the can outside, under the lean-to by the back door. Just easier than lugging it through the house, and safer, less chance of spilling that smelly stuff indoors. So, I'm out there, in the backyard. Just me and the moon, and the shadows stretching from the trees around the edge of the property. pumping the kerosene into the heater, that clunky metal sound it makes, kind of rhythmic. That's all I could hear at first, just the pump and the crickets probably, though they were starting to quiet down for the year. Then I heard it. It wasn't loud at first, just a snap, like a twig breaking. It came from the woods, the tree line at the back of the yard. I stopped pumping, held still, just listening. Probably a deer, I thought. Deer wander through here all the time, especially this time of year. They get bold when the weather turns cold, looking for scraps closer to houses. But then there was another sound, louder this time, more like a crack, like a branch snapping, a decent-sized one. And then the rustle of leaves, definitely coming from the woods. But it wasn't just a rustle, it was heavier, like something bigger than a deer moving around in there. My heart started to pick up speed. I straightened up, heater half full, kerosene can still in my hand. I scanned the woods, trying to see into the shadows, but the moonlight made it worse, all patchy and confusing. I couldn't see anything, just black shapes and silvered leaves. And then the noise started again, properly. It wasn't just twigs snapping now, it was like something was crashing through the undergrowth, bushes breaking, branches getting pushed aside, leaves being trampled. It wasn't random animal noises either, it was purposeful, like something big was moving and moving fast, and it was coming closer. My chest tightened up, that tight, cold feeling of pure fear. Adrenaline jolted through me. This wasn't a deer, no deer makes that kind of noise, and it was too heavy, too clumsy, too reckless. Like whatever it was, it didn't care who heard it, didn't care if it was making a racket. I started to breathe faster, shallow breaths. My eyes were wide, straining to see into the woods. The noise was getting closer, definitely closer. I could hear the heavy thudding of something pushing through thick stuff, the rip of branches tearing, the crunch of I don't know what. It was all jumbled together, but loud, getting louder. Panic flared up, hot and sudden. My mind went blank for a second, then instinct took over. I dropped the kerosene can, clattered on the concrete, probably spilled some, didn't even register at the time, and I ran for the back door. Didn't even think. Just ran. Scrambled for the door handle, fumbled with the lock, got it open, and bolted inside. Slammed the door behind me, threw the bolt, then the chain, even though I knew, logically, that wouldn't stop anything big. But I did it anyway, just felt like I needed to do something. Inside, in the kitchen, it felt safer somehow, even though it was just thin walls and glass windows between me and whatever was out there. My heart was hammering in my chest, so loud I could hear it over the ringing in my ears. I was breathing in gasps, trying to suck in air, lungs burning. I stood there, pressed against the door, listening. Silence. For a few seconds, there was just silence. Just the sound of my own ragged breathing. Maybe it was nothing, I thought. Maybe it was just a deer, just a big, clumsy one that happened to be moving loudly. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe... Then it started again. Not the crashing through the woods this time. It was closer now, right at the edge of the yard, just beyond the trees. The rustling of leaves, low and menacing, like something was just right there, watching me. And then I heard it. The snapping of twigs again, but closer, much closer. Like whatever it was had moved out of the thick woods and was right at the tree line, the edge of the open yard. Fear clawed at me, cold and sharp. I backed away from the door, moving into the living room. My eyes darted around, searching for, I don't know what, a weapon, something to defend myself with. My gaze fell on the old .44 Magnum, sitting in its usual place on the shelf above the fireplace. My granddad's old hunting revolver, heavy, powerful, loud as hell. Haven't fired it in years, but I knew it was loaded. Always kept it loaded, just in case. You never know out here. I grabbed it. It felt cold and solid in my hand, reassuring in a strange way. Like having some kind of protection, even if I didn't know what I was protecting myself from. The weight of it was comforting somehow. Adrenaline was pumping now, full force. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clearer, sharper. The fear was still there, but it was mixed with something else now. Anger, maybe, and a weird kind of grim determination. Whatever was out there, I wasn't going to just cower inside and wait for it to... whatever it was going to do. I moved to the front window, carefully, keeping low, peeking out from the side of the curtain. Nothing. Just the moonlit yard, bathed in that eerie silver light. Everything looked normal. Too normal. The quiet was heavy now, suffocating. The crickets had stopped completely. Even the wind seemed to have died down. Just silence. Waiting silence. I moved to the back window, the one overlooking the backyard, the woods. Same thing. Moonlight and shadows, and that thick line of trees at the edge of the property. Still, quiet. Too quiet. Then I saw it. Or heard it again. The faintest rustle, just on the edge of hearing, coming from the woods, the tree line. Something moving, slowly now, deliberately, not crashing and breaking anymore. Now it was stealthy, creeping. I gripped the revolver tighter, thumb flicking the hammer back. The click sounded ridiculously loud in the silence. My heart was pounding again, even harder this time. I knew somehow that whatever was out there, it was still coming. It hadn't gone away. It was just being careful now. Stupidly, I went back to the back door, unbolted it, unchained it, slowly, carefully, making as little noise as possible. My hand was slick with sweat on the revolver grip. Took a deep breath, held it. Then I threw the door open and stepped back out onto the porch. The moonlight hit me, bright and cold. The yard was empty, seemingly empty. But the silence felt different now, heavy, charged, like something was watching me even if I couldn't see it. I took a step off the porch onto the grass, then another, slowly, deliberately moving towards the tree line, revolver raised, pointing into the shadows. Adrenaline screamed in my ears. I could feel my pulse throbbing in my temples. "Hello?" My voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. It sounded ridiculous even to me, like talking to the dark itself. Silence. No answer. Just the heavy silence and the feeling of being watched. I took another step closer to the woods. The shadows seemed to deepen, to reach out towards me. I stopped, listened, strained my eyes, trying to pierce the darkness, and then it moved, not crashing, not breaking things this time, just a movement, a shift in the shadows, just inside the tree line, about 20 yards away. Something dark, something bulky. I couldn't make out any details, just a shape in the shadows. But I knew it was there. I could feel it there. Fear mixed with anger again. This time it was stronger. Whatever this was, it had scared me in my own backyard. It had made me feel like prey in my own home, and something in me just snapped. I wasn't going to be scared anymore. I was going to face it, make it go away. "All right," I said, my voice louder this time, steadier. "All right, you want to play games? Let's play games." I lifted the revolver higher, aimed it at the dark shape in the woods. I still couldn't see what it was, not properly. Just a vague, dark mass in the shadows. But I aimed at it anyway, blindly, stupidly, angrily, and I fired. The roar of the .44 Magnum exploded in the night, deafening, echoing through the trees. The recoil slammed back into my hand, heavy, powerful. Flames spat from the barrel, lighting up the yard for a split second. Then another shot, and another, and another, and another. 5 shots in all, as fast as I could pull the trigger, emptying the cylinder into the dark shape in the woods. The echoes of the gunshots rolled away through the night, leaving a ringing silence in their wake. My ears were buzzing, my hand numb from the recoil. Smoke drifted from the barrel of the revolver, hanging in the still air. Silence. Heavy, ringing silence. I stood there, breathing hard, smoke curling around me, revolver still raised, waiting, expecting something, anything. And then it moved again, but not towards me, away, not crashing, not breaking branches anymore, just moving, quickly, stealthily, moving away from me, deeper into the woods. I heard the faint rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig getting fainter, fainter, then gone. Silence, complete, absolute silence, except for my own breathing and the ringing in my ears. I stood there for what felt like forever, revolver still in my hand, staring into the dark woods, waiting for something to happen, for something to come back. But nothing did. Just silence, and the empty, dark woods. Slowly, my adrenaline started to fade. The shaking in my hands lessened. The ringing in my ears started to subside. The fear began to recede, replaced by confusion and a cold, creeping unease. I lowered the revolver, stared at it in the moonlight. Stupid, I thought. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Firing shots into the dark like some crazy cowboy. What did I think I was doing? What did I think I was shooting at? I went back inside, bolted and chained the door again, went into the kitchen, turned on the light. The sudden brightness hurt my eyes. I felt shaky, weak, like I'd just run a marathon. My legs were trembling. I poured myself a stiff drink, whiskey, straight from the bottle. Drank it down in one gulp, felt the burn in my throat, the warmth spreading through my chest. It helped a little, calmed the shaking slightly. I sat down at the kitchen table, revolver still lying in front of me. Stared at it, stared at the dark windows. Listened to the silence. What the hell was that? That's what kept running through my head. What the hell was that? It wasn't a deer. It wasn't a bear. Too fast, too quiet after I fired, too something. I couldn't put my finger on it, just wrong. It felt wrong. I stayed up all night, sitting at the kitchen table, lights on, revolver loaded and ready. Listened to every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound made me jump. But nothing else happened, nothing came back. Just the silence and the darkness beyond the windows. The next morning, when the sun came up, I went outside, hesitantly at first, then bolder as the daylight spread through the yard. The kerosene can was still lying on its side, spilled kerosene stink in the air. No sign of anything, no blood, no tracks, no broken branches that weren't already there. Nothing to show that anything had even been out there at all, except in the woods, just inside the tree line, about where I'd aimed, there was something. I couldn't quite see it properly from the edge of the yard. Too many shadows, too many leaves, but there was a disturbance, like something had been there, something big, something that had moved fast. I didn't go in there to look. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to see what I might have shot at, or what might have been out there in the first place. Later, a few weeks later maybe, after the first proper frost, Silas, my brother, came to visit. We were talking outside, by the woodpile, chopping logs for winter. Just normal stuff. And I mentioned casually about the noises I'd heard in the woods that night. Didn't tell him about the gunshots, just the noises, the crashing, the feeling of something out there. He stopped chopping, straightened up, looked at me. His face was different, serious. "You heard it too," he said, quiet. "Heard what?" I asked, confused. "The laughing," he said, "from the woods, at night. You haven't heard it?" My blood ran cold. "Laughing," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "No." "What laughing?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, crazy, high laughing, like hyenas or something, but wrong. Not animal laughing, something else. I've heard it a few times, late at night, from those woods." He gestured towards the tree line at the back of my yard. Thought I was going crazy. I just stared at him, mouth dry. "No," I said finally. "No laughing, just crashing. Something big, moving fast." He shrugged. "Maybe it's the same thing. Maybe it changes the noise it makes. We went quiet then, just chopping wood, the rhythmic thunk of the axe the only sound for a while. But the silence felt different after that. Heavy again, watched. And now I hear things. Not just in the woods, everywhere. In the house, sometimes, late at night. Creaks and whispers, shadows moving at the edge of my vision. And when I'm out in the yard, especially near the woods, I get that feeling. The feeling of being watched. Not just watched, but studied. Like something is looking at me, analyzing me, learning me, like I'm a bug under a microscope. Silas says he feels it too now. That feeling. When he's out in the woods, hunting, trapping. He says the woods feel different now. Quieter somehow, but also full of something. Something unseen, something listening, something laughing. I still don't know what I shot at that night. And I don't want to know. Sometimes I think it's better not to know. Some things are better left in the dark, in the shadows, unexplained. But the feeling, that feeling of being watched, it's always there now. It hasn't gone away. And sometimes, late at night, when the moon is bright and the house is silent, I think I can almost hear it, faintly, distantly, carried on the night wind. The sound of laughing. Just a whisper, barely there, but enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. And enough to make me reach for the revolver, even though I know, deep down, it probably wouldn't make a damn bit of difference next time. Adri Story 5. It's still hard to talk about even now, months later. People tell you, oh, Willow Creek, lovely place to retire, and I just nod and smile, but inside, I'm screaming. They don't know. They couldn't possibly know what it's really like, what hides just beyond the manicured lawns and the friendly waves. It started subtly, almost so subtle you'd think you were imagining it. Jasper, my husband Jasper, he'd laugh it off, say I was letting my nerves get the better of me again, but he wasn't the one stuck in the house all day, battling the flare-ups, watching the woods get darker earlier every evening. He'd leave for work in the morning, sunshine usually still bright, birds singing, everything normal, and then I'd be alone. It began with the smell, this rank, putrid stink that would drift in on the evening air, like something had died nearby but amplified, rotten, almost sweet in a horrifying way. It would come and go, just a whiff at first, and then stronger, lingering, making my stomach churn. I checked for burst pipes, dead animals under the porch, everything logical. Nothing. Jasper, with his better sense of smell than mine, said he caught it sometimes, but he brushed it off. Farm smells, Ilara. We live in the countryside now, remember? But this wasn't farm smell. This was decay. Then the knocking started. Not on the door, not in a normal way. On the side of the house, mostly when I was out back in the garden with Jasper. Just a solid, dull thud, like someone had bumped against the wood. We'd both jump, look around, but there'd be nothing. No branches hitting, no kids playing pranks, just silence. And that heavy, nauseating smell would sometimes follow it. Or maybe it was just my imagination starting to play tricks on me. Jasper put it down to the house settling, old timbers creaking, but these were definite knocks, too deliberate to be the house settling. We'd bought the place last year, drawn in by the peace and quiet. Willow Creek seemed like the perfect escape from the city. A small, older house with a big garden, woods at the back, just what we both wanted. The garden had been overgrown, a jungle really, but we loved it. Spent the spring and summer clearing it, planting, making it our own. We put in apple trees, rebuilt the rose beds, even got some beautiful irises to grow right under the kitchen window, vibrant purple and blue, like jewels. They were my pride and joy. I'd sit in my armchair by the window, especially in the evenings. I have this condition, insomnia mostly, keeps me up at night. So I'd sit, sometimes with the TV on low, looking out at the woods, at the garden we were slowly taming, and I'd feel it then, that prickling feeling on the back of my neck, like eyes on me. I'd tell myself it was just the shadows, The way the moonlight played through the trees, making everything look alive and shifting. But it felt different. It felt watched. Then came the deer. It was a hot afternoon in late summer. Jasper and I were gathering firewood in the woods behind the house, not far in, just at the edge, really. We were chatting, joking about how our peaceful retirement had turned into constant backbreaking work. And then we saw it. The smell hit us first, that cloying rot, stronger than ever before. And then we rounded a bend in the path, and there it was, a deer. But not just a dead deer, it was violated. Its legs were twisted at impossible angles, snapped clean through, the bone white and jagged. Its body was splayed out awkwardly, like it had been thrown there, and its head was twisted almost completely off, hanging by just a few tendons, the eyes staring up at the sky, vacant and horrified. I'll never forget that image. The smell, the sight, the sheer unnaturalness of it. Jasper went white. He's normally so unflappable, but he just stood there staring. I think I made a small sound, a whimper maybe. He snapped out of it first, grabbed my arm, pulled me back. "Come on, Alara, let's go. Let's just go." We practically ran back to the house, neither of us saying a word. I was shaking so badly I could barely unlock the back door. Once inside, I locked it, bolted it, like that flimsy wood could keep out. Whatever had done that to the deer? That was when the fear really set in. It wasn't just the smells, or the knocks, or the feeling of being watched anymore. It was tangible. It was real. Something was out there, something brutal and violent. I couldn't sleep properly after that. Every little noise in the house, every rustle outside the window, made me jump. The insomnia got worse, the condition flared up constantly. I'd be exhausted all day, but wired at night, pacing the house, staring out into the darkness. The noises started getting worse at night too. Not just the knocks, but actual crashes and bangs against the house, like something heavy was throwing itself against the walls, especially at the back of the house, facing the woods. Jasper started to admit that maybe something was going on, but he still tried to downplay it. "Probably just branches falling, honey. Wind's been picking up." But there was no wind, and these weren't branches falling. These were deliberate, forceful impacts. And then there were the apples. We had 3 mature apple trees in the garden, laden with fruit, ripe and red. We were looking forward to making pies, maybe even cider. One morning, we woke up, and they were stripped bare. Not just a few apples missing, every single apple gone. The trees looked like they were in winter, branches stark and empty. And around the trees the ground was disturbed, muddy even though it hadn't rained in days, like something heavy had been moving around, trampling the earth. It was that evening, the evening after the apples vanished, that I saw it properly. I was in the kitchen, washing up after dinner. Jasper was in the living room, watching some game on TV, trying to distract himself, I think. It was starting to get dark outside, the kind of twilight that makes shadows stretch and deepen. I glanced out the window above the sink like I always did now, always scanning the edge of the woods, half expecting to see something. And then I did. Movement, just at the tree line, something dark, huge. I froze, dish in hand, water still running. I squinted, trying to focus, heart hammering against my ribs. It moved again, stepped out from the trees into the edge of our garden. It was tall, incredibly tall, way taller than any man. I mean, we have a fence, a low wooden fence around the garden just to mark the boundary, really. Maybe chest height on a normal person. This thing stepped over it like it wasn't even there. Just one long stride, and it was inside our garden, inside our space. It was dark, almost black, silhouetted against the fading light of the sky, covered in fur, thick, matted-looking fur. And its legs, they were long, impossibly long, like stilts, moving with a strange, loping gait. It wasn't like a bear, it wasn't like a deer, it wasn't anything I had ever seen before. It moved slowly, deliberately, towards the house. Not running, not charging, just approaching. Majestic almost in its size and darkness. It passed one of our apple trees, the stripped one, and I saw its body for a moment against the tree trunk. Muscles rippling under that dark fur, broad shoulders, a thick neck. It was massive. Bigger than anything I could have imagined. The researcher later said 2.5 to 3 meters tall. I believe it. It looked even bigger. It moved past the apple tree, towards the side of the house where the kitchen window was, towards me. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, to yell for Jasper, but I couldn't make a sound. I was paralyzed, frozen to the spot, staring at this creature. As it moved closer and closer, it stopped just beyond the edge of the irises. My beautiful irises crushed flat. I hadn't noticed before, hadn't been out in the garden today, but they were ruined. Flattened, stems broken, flowers bruised and trampled, like something heavy had lain down on them or stepped all over them while watching me. The creature stood there at the edge of the irises, just a few feet from the window, from me. I could feel its presence, its weight, its otherness. The darkness around it seemed to deepen. The air seemed to thicken. I could see it clearly now, even in the fading light. The dark fur, the long legs, the sheer size of it. But I couldn't make out details. Its head was indistinct, shadowy. I couldn't see eyes, not really. Just darkness within darkness. It stood there for what felt like forever, just watching. Me watching it. A silent, terrifying standoff in the twilight. The only sound was the water still running in the sink, a soft, mocking trickle in the face of this colossal, silent presence. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. One moment it was there, filling the space outside the window with its looming darkness, and the next, it was gone. Just empty garden, darkening woods beyond. Silence, except for the water. I finally moved, turned off the tap, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the handle. I backed away from the window, slowly, step by step, until I reached the living room. Jasper was still on the sofa, engrossed in the game, oblivious. "Jasper," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Jasper, you need to see this." He looked up, startled. "See what, honey? What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't speak properly, couldn't form the words. I just pointed towards the kitchen window, towards the back garden, towards the woods. He frowned, got up, followed me into the kitchen. He looked out the window, scanned the garden, the woods. "See what, Ilara? I don't see anything, just the garden, getting dark." "It was there," I said, my voice trembling. "Just now, right there, by the irises. It was huge, Jasper, huge and dark, like a monster." He looked at me, his expression a mixture of concern and disbelief. "Ilara, are you sure you're feeling okay? Maybe your medication." "No!" I cried, my voice cracking. "I saw it, Jasper. I saw it with my own eyes. It was real. It was right there." I gestured frantically to the flattened irises. Look what it did to the flowers. They were fine this morning." He looked down at the irises, then back at me, his face still doubtful, but a flicker of something else in his eyes, something unease. He stepped closer to the window, peered out into the darkness again. He was silent for a long time. Then, very slowly, he said, Okay, Ilara. Let's lock up, shall we? And we'll talk about it in the morning." He sounded strained, his voice not quite his usual calm, reassuring tone. We locked up. Every door, every window, double-bolted, chained, everything we could. It felt ridiculous, like locking up against a hurricane with paperclips, but we did it anyway. We went to bed, but neither of us slept properly. I lay there, heart pounding, listening to every creak of the house, every rustle outside. Jasper was restless beside me, tossing and turning, not snoring like he usually did. The night passed slowly, agonizingly. Dawn finally broke, weak and pale, through the bedroom window. We got up, stiff and exhausted, feeling like we hadn't slept at all. The house felt cold, heavy, the air thick with unspoken fear. Jasper made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table I had been washing up at just hours before, staring out at the window, at the garden, at the woods. Everything looked normal in the daylight, too normal. Maybe it was a bear, Jasper said finally, tentatively breaking the silence. A really big bear standing on its hind legs. They can do that sometimes, right? I just stared at him, not saying anything. A bear that tall, a bear that moved like that, and a bear that flattened my irises and haunted my garden with its stench for weeks. I don't know, Jasper, I said quietly. I really don't know what it was. But it wasn't a bear. We tried to go back to normal, tried to pretend it hadn't happened, but we couldn't. The fear was always there, hanging in the air, invisible but suffocating. We didn't go back into the woods. We barely went into the garden. We just stayed inside, locked up, watching the windows, listening to the silence. A few weeks later, a researcher came to the village, asking questions about unusual animal sightings. Apparently, there had been other reports, vague, mostly dismissed as folklore or misidentification. He asked us about our property, about what we'd seen, heard. I told him everything, about the smells, the knocks, the deer, the apples, and finally, about the creature in the garden. He listened, took notes, asked detailed questions. He didn't dismiss me, didn't laugh, didn't tell me I was imagining things. He asked about our habits, what we did around the property, and then he asked about throwing out food scraps. Do you, by any chance, dispose of kitchen waste outside, in your garden or near the woods? He asked, looking directly at me. I hesitated, then admitted, well, yes, sometimes. Just vegetable peelings, coffee grounds, eggshells, that kind of thing. We compost some, but sometimes it's just easier to toss it out back. He nodded slowly. And where do you usually toss it? Just over there, near the edge of the woods, I said, pointing towards the back garden, towards the place where I had seen it. By the trees. He said nothing for a moment, just scribbled in his notebook. Then he looked up at me again, his eyes serious. Mrs. Blackwood, he said, you may have inadvertently attracted something unusual to your property by providing a food source. He couldn't tell me what it was. He wouldn't speculate. He just said that there were reports of large, unidentified creatures in wooded areas, creatures that were drawn to sources of food, creatures that were elusive, nocturnal, and potentially dangerous. He left us with warnings to secure our garbage properly, to stop throwing food outside, to be vigilant, to report any further sightings. And then he was gone, another faceless researcher in a long line of unanswered questions. We did what he said. Stopped throwing food outside, secured the garbage. We even bought motion sensor lights and put them up around the garden. But the feeling didn't go away. The fear didn't lessen. I still sit in my armchair by the window at night, even though Jasper tells me not to. I still look out at the woods, at the garden, into the darkness. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I see movement at the edge of the trees, a shadow shifting, something tall and dark moving in the undergrowth. And the smell, sometimes just a faint whiff, drifts in on the night air, that sickly, sweet, rotten stench, a chilling reminder of what I saw, what I felt, what I still can't explain. It's been months now, and I still don't know what it was. And that's the part that really gets to me. The not knowing, the feeling that it's still out there, somewhere in the woods, watching, waiting, and we're just here, in its territory, trapped in our own home with the lights on, hoping it stays away, but knowing deep down that it could come back any time, and we wouldn't even know what we were facing. Story 6. It's still hard to talk about it even now. You know, you hear stories all your life, whispers around campfires, that uncle who swears he saw something out in the woods, And you always think, yeah, sure, Uncle Joe's been hitting the source again. But then something happens to you, something you can't explain away with logic or booze or bad eyesight, and everything you thought you knew about the world shifts, like the ground under your feet suddenly gets a little softer, a little less solid. We've been going to Pinewood State Park for years, me and my family, since the kids were little. It's not fancy, not like some of these places you see with paved trails and visitor centers. Pinewood's raw, real woods. Aspen County, West Virginia, middle of nowhere, basically. Monongahela National Forest surrounds it. It's beautiful, don't get me wrong. Pine trees so tall they block out half the sky, thick underbrush. The air smells clean and earthy. We always set up camp in the same spot, a little clearing near a creek. It's got that perfect mix of being secluded, but not so deep in you feel totally cut off. Though, maybe cut off would have been better in the long run. We always knew there were things in those woods, sounds mostly. At night, after the campfire died down and everyone was tucked in their tents or the trailer, you'd hear it. Just noises. Like something big moving through the trees, branches snapping that seemed too thick for a deer, the occasional howl or shriek that didn't sound like any animal I knew. Coyotes? Maybe. But these were deeper, more primal. We called them the night noises. Didn't talk about them much, just sort of accepted them as part of being out there. I'd heard stories, of course. Local legends, campfire tales, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever you want to call it. I'd always dismissed it, you know. Funny stories to tell around the fire, get a rise out of the kids. Never believed it, never really considered it a possibility, until that night, 2016. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was late summer, end of August. Perfect camping weather, cool nights, warm days. Kids were finally old enough to really enjoy hiking and exploring. We had the trailer set up, campfire crackling, marshmallows roasting, normal camping stuff. Kids were tired out from the day, asleep in their bunks by 10. Me and Sarah, my wife, we sat up by the fire a bit longer, just talking, enjoying the quiet. Except, it wasn't exactly quiet. The usual night sounds were there, crickets chirping, owls hooting in the distance, but there was something else, something underneath it all, a kind of pressure in the air. Hard to explain. We banked the fire around midnight and headed into the trailer. Fell asleep pretty quickly. We were both exhausted. Then, sometime later, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, I woke up. Suddenly, like someone had shaken me awake. It was dead quiet in the trailer. Except for Sarah breathing softly next to me, everything else was just gone. The crickets, the owls, even the wind seemed to have stopped. Eerie quiet. Then I heard it. At first, it was faint, muffled, like heavy footsteps. But not like human footsteps. Too heavy, too deliberate. Like something big was moving and it didn't care who heard it. It was coming from behind the trailer, in the woods. My heart started to pound. At first, I tried to tell myself it was a bear. Yeah, a bear, probably just sniffing around the campsite looking for food. That's it. But the footsteps, they were too bipedal, upright, and the weight. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before. I nudged Sarah awake. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. She was still half asleep. "Hear what?" she mumbled. "Listen," I said, and held my breath. And then she heard it too. Her eyes snapped open, wide awake now. She grabbed my arm, her grip tight. "What is that?" she whispered, voice trembling slightly. "I don't know," I said, but deep down a cold dread was starting to creep into my gut. I think I knew even then, that this wasn't a bear. This was something else. The footsteps were getting closer now, louder. Cracking branches, leaves crunching under heavy weight. It sounded like a freight train coming through the woods, only slower, more deliberate. Whatever it was big, really big. My mind raced. What should we do? Stay inside the trailer? Try to scare it away? I knew we had a flashlight in the storage compartment at the back of the trailer, a big, heavy-duty one of those rechargeable spotlight types. I figured if it was a bear, a bright light and some noise might scare it off. But what if it wasn't a bear? I took a deep breath. "I'm going to check it out," I said to Sarah, trying to sound braver than I felt. My hands were shaking. Sarah's eyes were huge. "Are you crazy?" "No, don't go out there. Stay here, lock the door." "If it's a bear, it could try to get into the trailer," I argued, knowing it was a weak argument even as I said it. Really, I just needed to see what it was. I couldn't stand the not knowing, the fear building inside me. "Take something with you," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "Something to protect yourself." I looked around. All we had inside the trailer was camping stuff. A cast-iron skillet, a folding camp shovel, not exactly weapons. Then I remembered the hatchet we used for splitting firewood. It was outside, by the fire pit. Too far. No, the flashlight would have to do. Light, noise. That's what you're supposed to do with wild animals, right? I slowly, quietly opened the trailer door. The cold night air hit me like a slap in the face. It was dark, pitch black except for the faint glow of the banked fire in the distance. The footsteps were right behind the trailer now, just on the other side of the thin aluminum wall. I could practically feel the weight of whatever was out there. My heart was hammering in my chest. I reached into the storage compartment, fumbled around in the dark until I found the flashlight. It was heavy in my hand, solid. I flicked the switch. A powerful beam of light cut through the darkness, slicing into the trees behind the trailer. And that's when I saw them. Two of them, standing just at the edge of the woods, maybe 20 yards away, massive, taller than anything I'd ever imagined. They were figures, upright like people, but not. Covered in dark, matted fur, huge shoulders, thick necks, long arms that hung down almost to their knees. I froze, completely paralyzed. The flashlight beam was shaking in my hand, bouncing all over the place. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't even think straight. Just stared at these things. They were just standing there too, staring back. In the beam of the flashlight, I could see their eyes. And that's what I'll never forget. Their eyes. They were green. Not just green, but glowing green, like emeralds burning in the darkness. A weird, eerie, almost fluorescent green. And they were locked on me, intense, intelligent, and unsettling. There was something in those eyes, something that wasn't animalistic but wasn't human either. Something else. For what felt like an eternity, we just stood there, staring at each other, me frozen in fear, and them just watching, those green eyes burning in the night. I could feel my blood turning to ice. A primal terror deep in my bones took hold of me. Then, suddenly, one of them moved, quickly, without warning. It took a step to the left, and then another, moving away from the trailer, deeper into the woods. The other one moved too, mirroring its movement, stepping to the right, disappearing into the darkness on the other side, just gone, like they'd just evaporated. It all happened so fast. 1 second they were there, massive and terrifying. The next second, nothing, just darkness and the rustling of leaves in the wind that had suddenly picked up again. I stood there, still frozen, the flashlight beam shaking, pointed at the empty space where they'd been just moments before. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even really process what I'd just seen. Then a sound from the woods, from the direction they'd disappeared. A sound that, I don't know how to describe it, not a howl, not a growl, not a scream, something in between, high-pitched, piercing, chilling to the bone. It echoed through the trees, bouncing off the hills and right into my soul. A sound of anger, pain, warning. I don't know, but it was terrifying. I snapped back to reality, turned around, stumbled back into the trailer, slamming the door shut behind me and fumbling with the flimsy lock. Sarah was right there, by the door, her face pale, eyes wide with terror. "What was it? What did you see?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I just shook my head, unable to speak. I couldn't even find the words. I don't know," I finally managed to stammer out. Just something big, 2 of them, green eyes." She stared at me, uncomprehending, but she could see the fear in my face, the real raw terror that was still shaking me to my core. She didn't push me for details. She just knew something awful had happened. We spent the rest of the night sitting up in the trailer, lights on, windows covered, listening to every sound outside. The woods seemed to be alive, breathing, watching. We didn't hear the footsteps again, but we heard other sounds, rustling in the underbrush, branches snapping in the distance, and that sound again, faint, far away, but still there. That unearthly shriek echoing through the darkness. It went on for hours. Long after dawn started to break, painting the sky a pale grey, the sounds still drifted in from the woods. We packed up camp as soon as it was light enough to see, didn't even eat breakfast, just threw everything in the trailer, hooked it up to the truck, and got the hell out of there. Kids were still groggy, didn't understand what was going on. Sarah kept glancing back at the woods as we drove away, her face drawn and pale. I just stared straight ahead, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. We haven't been back to Pinewood since. Haven't camped anywhere, actually. Not really. We talk about it sometimes, me and Sarah, in hushed tones, late at night after the kids are asleep. We try to make sense of it, to explain it away. But we can't. We saw what we saw. 2 massive fur-covered creatures standing in the darkness with glowing green eyes, and that sound will haunt me forever. People ask, "What do you think they were?" And I honestly don't know. Sasquatch? Bigfoot? Some kind of something else? Something we don't understand. I don't have any answers. All I know is that something is out there, something real, something powerful, something terrifying. And it's out there, in the woods, watching, waiting. And I hope to God I never see it again. I still go camping sometimes with friends. But it's different now. I can't relax. I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. Every rustle in the leaves, every snap of a branch, sends a jolt of fear through me. And at night, when the woods go quiet and the darkness closes in, I still hear that shriek. Faint, distant, but always there. A reminder, a chilling echo from the darkness of Pinewood State Park. And I know deep down that whatever I saw that night, it's still out there. And it knows I saw it. And that's the part that really scares me. The knowing. That they know, and that they're still watching. Somewhere out in the dark, waiting. Story 7. Okay, so this happened a few years back. I don't really talk about it much because, honestly, who'd believe it? And even thinking about it now still messes with my head. I used to be a forest ranger, stationed out in Pinewood State Park. Loved the job. Loved being outdoors. Thought I knew the woods like the back of my hand. Boy, was I wrong. This wasn't even in Pinewood Park itself, but kinda close, near the Monongahela National Forest area, just over the border. I was on assignment, tracking some weird animal sightings that had been reported. Nothing too crazy, just your usual big cat or weird wolf-type stuff people see out in the boonies. But protocol was protocol, and I had to check it out. I'd been hiking all day, deeper than I meant to go, chasing what turned out to be absolutely nothing. Sun started dipping down, and I realized I'd gotten properly turned around. My radio signal was crap. Trees were too thick, and the valleys were too deep. No GPS signal either. Surprise, surprise. I tried retracing my steps, but everything started to look the same. You know how it is in deep woods? Every tree, every rock, every damn shadow looks identical after a while. Panic started to set in, just a little tickle at the back of my neck. I told myself to calm down, that I was trained for this. I found a relatively clear patch, figured I'd better just camp out and get my bearings in the morning. Made a small fire, wasn't supposed to. Fire danger was moderate, but I needed the light and the comfort, you know. Set up my little one-man tent, a cheap thing, lightweight and easy to pack. Drank some water, ate a ration bar, tasted like cardboard, but it was food. Crawled into my sleeping bag, zipped it up tight. Figured I'd be asleep in minutes, exhausted as I was. But the woods at night, man, they're a whole different world. During the day, it's all sunshine and birds and rustling leaves, kinda peaceful even when you're lost. But night is when everything changes. The sounds get amplified, those shadows stretch out and twist into things that aren't really there, but feel like they could be. At first, it was just normal night sounds. Owls hooting in the distance, crickets chirping their little brains out, the fire crackling and popping. I could hear the wind whispering through the trees, a low, constant sighing sound. It was okay. I was starting to drift off, feeling a little bit better now that I had a fire and shelter, even if it was just a thin nylon tent. Then the howling started. Not like dog howling, not like coyote howling. This was deeper, more guttural. It started far off, a low, mournful sound that sent a shiver right down my spine. It wasn't just one howl, it was like a chorus, echoing through the trees. And it was getting closer. My heart started pounding. I sat up in my sleeping bag, listening, every muscle tense. The fire was burning down, just glowing embers now, casting long, dancing shadows against the inside of my tent. Through the thin fabric, I could see the flickering orange light, and then something else. A shadow. But not a tree shadow, not a normal shadow. This was massive. It blocked out the firelight completely. It was tall and wide, and it was moving. Slowly at first, then faster, coming straight towards my camp. Fear, real, honest-to-God terror just grabbed me. My breath hitched in my throat. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Bear? Too tall? Too bulky? Mountain lion? They don't howl like that. Wolf? Wolves don't get that big. And those howls, they weren't wolf howls. Stupidly, I think maybe adrenaline or just plain dumb hope kicked in, and I thought, maybe it's rangers, maybe they found me. Yeah, I know, dumb. But in that moment, that was the only explanation my freaked-out brain could come up with that wasn't completely insane. "Hello?" I yelled, my voice cracking. "Hello? Is that you guys? I'm okay, I'm just camped out here." Silence, except for the crackling embers and the wind in the trees, and that howling, which was still going on, closer now, much closer, and the shadow, still there, huge and looming right outside my tent. "Rangers?" I called again, louder this time, trying to sound braver than I felt. "I'm over here, camped near the old creek bed." I even unzipped the tent flap a little bit, peering out into the darkness. Just enough to see past the flap, not enough to really see anything out there, just darkness. And then it happened. Something grabbed my tent, not like pushed it, grabbed it, like a giant hand clamped around it. I heard this ripping sound, nylon tearing, and then my whole tent, me inside it, was lifted, clean off the ground. My stomach lurched, I screamed, pure animal scream of terror. I was being lifted, like I was nothing, like my tent was just a toy, and I was stuck inside it. The ground dropped away. I could see the embers of the fire below me getting smaller and smaller. I was going up, and then I was being moved, dragged, carried. Something was hauling me, tent and all, through the trees. Branches scraped against the nylon, ripping and tearing at it. I was being thrown around inside the tent like a rag doll, banging against the poles, hitting the ground and then being yanked up again. Everything was spinning, disoriented, terrifyingly fast. I was flailing around, scrambling to get out of my sleeping bag, trying to think, to do something. My pack, I remembered. My pack was next to me. Gun. My sidearm was in my pack. Got to get to my gun. I wrestled myself out of the sleeping bag, fumbling, shaking so bad I could barely move my fingers. Reached for my pack, grabbed it, dragged it towards me, still being tossed around like crazy. Zipped open the main compartment, my hands slick with sweat. Felt around inside, frantic. Where is it? Where is it? Gun. Finally, my fingers closed around the cold metal of my pistol grip. My service weapon, a .40 caliber Glock. Felt like a lifeline. Pulled it out, thumbed off the safety, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold it steady. The tent was still being dragged through the woods. I could hear the crashing of branches, the snapping of twigs, the awful ripping sound of the nylon getting shredded. I didn't know where I was going, what was doing this, but I knew I had to fight back. I had to try something. I pointed the gun upwards, towards the top of the tent, where I guessed whatever was holding me was. I couldn't see anything, everything was dark and swirling and fabric. But I aimed high above me, and I fired. First shot, deafening loud in the enclosed space of the tent. The recoil slammed into my wrist. I fired again. Second shot, even louder. Sparks from the muzzle flash flickered in front of my eyes. Third shot. I squeezed the trigger again, aimed even higher this time, practically straight up. This time, something different happened. Instead of just the gunshot, there was a sound. A grunt, but not a human grunt. Deep, guttural, like something huge, something in pain, and angry, really angry. And then a thump, a massive, heavy thump, like something huge just hit the ground, hard. And then suddenly everything stopped. The dragging stopped, the spinning stopped. I was just lying there on the ground, in my ripped-up, shredded tent. Everything was silent, except for my own ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart in my ears. I didn't move. I didn't dare move. I lay there, curled up in a ball in the wreckage of my tent, clutching my gun, listening, waiting. For what? I didn't know. For it to come back? For it to be over? I had no idea. Minutes stretched out, feeling like hours. The silence was heavy, oppressive. Finally, slowly, carefully, I unzipped the tent flap again. This time, it was ripped wide open, practically hanging off. I peeked out. Darkness. Moon was hidden behind the clouds, but the embers of the fire were still glowing faintly, casting a weak red light. I could see trees, just trees, and my tent. Ripped to shreds, collapsed around me. I slowly, cautiously crawled out of the tent, still clutching my gun, looked around. Nothing, just trees, darkness, silence, except for the wind still sighing through the branches. I stood up, my legs shaky. My head was spinning. I felt bruised and battered, like I'd been thrown down a flight of stairs. I took a step, then another. Looked around again. Nothing. I checked my gun. 3 rounds fired. 7 left in the magazine. Still felt like nothing compared to whatever the hell had just happened. I didn't know what to do. Run? Stay? Rebuild my fire? I was frozen, paralyzed by fear and confusion. Then I saw it. Blood. A dark stain on the leaves near where I'd fallen out of the tent. Small drops at first, then bigger, darker patches, leading away from my camp, into the woods. My blood ran cold. What had I hit? What had I shot? That grunt, that thump. Something had been hurt, badly hurt, and it was gone. Dragged itself or been carried away into the woods. Curiosity, stupid, morbid curiosity got the better of me. Or maybe it was just disbelief. I had to see. I had to know what had happened. Gun still in hand, safety off, finger on the trigger, I started to follow the blood trail. It wasn't hard to follow. Big dark splotches on the leaves, on the ground, leading deeper into the woods. It went uphill, then down into a small ravine. I followed it, step by slow, careful step, my heart pounding every time a twig snapped or a leaf rustled. The blood trail led to the edge of a cliff. A sudden drop-off. I stopped at the edge, shining my flashlight down into the darkness below, couldn't see the bottom. Just trees, more darkness, and the sound of water maybe. A creek down there somewhere. And right at the edge of the cliff, the blood trail ended. But there was more blood here, a lot more. a big, dark, sickening pool of blood soaking into the ground, and drag marks, long, deep gouges in the dirt, leading right to the edge of the cliff. Something big had been dragged to the edge and pushed over, fallen, jumped. I shined my light down again, trying to see if anything was visible below. Nothing, just darkness, and the smell of blood, thick and metallic in the cold night air. My mind was screaming at me to get out of there, to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But another part of me, the ranger part, the trained part, was saying, you need to know what happened. You need to investigate. You shot something. You need to find out what it was. But the fear was winning. The raw, gut-wrenching terror that had been building up all night, it was about to break me. I couldn't stay there, not another second. I turned around and ran, not walked, ran, as fast as I could. Back the way I'd come, crashing through the undergrowth, not caring about noise, not caring about direction, just running. Away from that cliff, away from the blood, away from whatever had taken me. And as I ran, I heard it. Behind me, in the darkness of the woods, the sound, the howling, but closer now, much closer, and different, not mournful anymore, angry, furious, like something was hunting me, something big, something hurt, something unnatural. And then, along with the howls, I heard another sound, a sound that chilled me to the bone, a low, guttural growl, right behind me, close, too close. I ran faster, my lungs burning, legs aching, tripping and stumbling, but I kept running. I could hear it behind me, crashing through the trees, keeping pace with me. The growls and howls echoing through the night, getting closer, closer. I didn't look back. I just ran, until I couldn't run anymore, until I collapsed, gasping for breath, hidden behind a thick stand of trees, listening, and silence. No more howls, no more growls, just the wind and the crickets and my own ragged breathing. Had it given up? Had I escaped? I didn't know. I didn't dare move. I stayed hidden there until dawn, shivering, terrified, gun clutched in my hand, listening to every sound. When the first rays of sunlight finally broke through the trees, I got up, stiff and sore and exhausted, and I walked. Walked until I found a trail. Walked until I found my way back to civilization. I never went back to that part of the woods. I reported myself as lost, disoriented, made up some story about getting turned around and having to spend the night in the woods. Left out the other part, the part no one would believe, the part that still haunts my nightmares. They sent a team out to look for my camp, to look for me. They found the fire pit. They found the shredded remains of my tent. They even found the blood trail, and they followed it to the cliff. They found the pool of blood at the edge. But they didn't find anything else. No body, no sign of what had been there, just blood and drag marks, and a whole lot of unanswered questions. They said it was probably a bear attack. A bear gone over the cliff. That's what they wrote in the official report. A bear. But I know it wasn't a bear. Bears don't howl like that. Bears don't grab tents and lift them into the air. Bears don't leave pools of blood that big and then just disappear. I don't know what it was, and I don't want to know. All I know is something in those woods that night picked me up, carried me, and dropped me. And whatever it was big and angry, and it's still out there. And sometimes late at night, when the wind is just right, I still hear it, faintly in the distance, the howling. And I remember that night in the woods. And I know, whatever it was, it's still out there, watching, waiting. Story 8. It was summer, hot as asphalt in a skillet, like only Texas summer can be, you know? 1983. Feels like a lifetime ago, but certain things just stick with you, branded into your brain like a hot iron on leather. I was just a kid, maybe 10, 11 years old, and my Uncle Roy, he wasn't much older, probably 17, was in charge that day. Mom was working double shifts at the diner in town, and Roy was supposed to be watching me, which mostly meant keeping me out of trouble and making sure I ate something besides candy. We lived outside of Trinity, kind of in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by pines and dirt roads that kicked up dust devils even when there wasn't a breeze. Trinity was small even then, and out where we were it felt even smaller, like the rest of the world was miles and miles away. That day was so typical, hot sun beating down, cicadas buzzing so loud you almost felt it in your teeth. Boredom was the main feeling of the day, that heavy, sticky summer boredom that just makes you want to lie down in the shade and do absolutely nothing. Roy, being a teenager, had suddenly gotten a craving for pizza. It was kind of a big deal back then to get pizza, not like now where you can get it delivered to your door in 30 minutes. We had to actually drive into town, and even then, the pizza place, Papa Tony's, was kind of a treat. So Roy gets it in his head that we need pizza. And being bored, and honestly, kind of always wanting to do whatever Roy was doing because he was the cool older one, I was all for it. So we pile into his old Dodge van. It was this beat-up brown thing, smelled like stale cigarettes and motor oil, but it was wheels. Windows down, the wind whipping your hair around, that's summer freedom right there. We're driving down Route 94, which wasn't much more than a paved road that snaked through the trees. Pine forests on both sides, thick and dark, swallowing up the sunlight even though it was the middle of the afternoon. The air outside was thick with the smell of pine needles baking in the heat and that dry, dusty Texas smell that gets in your nose and clothes. We were maybe halfway to town, just cruising along, Roy humming some song on the radio, when he slams on the brakes. I mean slams on them. I lurched forward, smacked my knee on the dashboard hard, and yelped. "What the heck, Roy?" I remember yelling at him, rubbing my knee. He just points, his hand shaking a little out the windshield towards the side of the road. And that's when I saw it. At first, I didn't really understand what I was looking at. Sunlight was blasting through the trees, making everything kind of hazy and glinting. But there, just off the shoulder of the road, where the pines thinned out a little, was this thing. It was big. Really, really big. Standing there, sort of hunched over, but still towering. My first thought, stupidly, because that's what my brain tried to make sense of it as, was maybe it was a really big guy, like a football player or something, dressed up in some kind of weird costume. Because it was covered in hair. Reddish-brown hair, thick and matted looking, all over. It was messing with something on the ground. As we got closer, still rolling a bit even though Roy had slammed the brakes, I realized it was a deer. A dead deer. And this thing was dragging it by the antlers like it was nothing, like it was pulling a kid's wagon, not a full-grown deer. The deer was limp, neck twisted at an unnatural angle, legs dangling. It was clear it was dead, and it was clear this thing had killed it. That's when the costume idea went out the window real fast. This wasn't a guy in a suit. This was something else, something wrong. Roy puts the van in park, kills the engine. The radio clicks off, and suddenly all you hear is the buzz of the cicadas again, but now it sounds different, louder somehow, menacing, like everything has gotten sharper and more dangerous. The heat suddenly felt oppressive, and the smell of pine, which usually smelled good, suddenly felt heavy and suffocating. We just sat there staring. My mouth went dry. I couldn't swallow. I felt like I was frozen solid, like I'd turned into a statue right there in the passenger seat. Roy wasn't saying anything either. I could see his hands gripping the steering wheel, white-knuckled. He was breathing, but shallow, quick breaths. We kept drifting closer, just the last little roll of the van, maybe 10, 15 feet away from it now, and I could see it clearer. It was tall. I mean, really tall. Roy is a big guy now, but even then he was tall for his age, and this thing was easily twice his height. 8 feet tall? Maybe more. It was hard to tell exactly because it was kind of hunched over the deer, but it was massive. The shoulders on it, like a bull, wide and thick, muscles bunching under that matted fur. And the fur, it wasn't smooth like a bear's or something. It looked coarse and dirty, like it was caked with mud and leaves and who knows what else. The color was like dried blood, a dark reddish brown, but in the sun it had these strange lighter streaks in it, almost like sun-bleached patches, but uneven. It was just unkempt, like nothing had ever bothered to groom or clean it. It had these arms, long and thick, ending in hands that were not quite human, not quite animal. They were big, with long fingers, but the fingernails, they weren't nails. They were thick, black claws, and they were gripping the deer's antlers, those antlers digging into the fur on its palms as it dragged. It was focused on the deer, didn't seem to notice us at first. And in that moment, watching it, a cold, creeping dread started to crawl up my spine. This wasn't natural. This wasn't something that was supposed to exist. It was like looking at a nightmare made real. Then it moved. Just its head. It lifted its head, slowly, deliberately, and turned it towards us, like it had finally registered we were there. And when it turned all the way, until it was facing us directly. That's when I saw its face. Or where its face should have been, because it wasn't a face like any animal or person I'd ever seen. It was primitive, flat almost, like its features were just shoved onto the front of its skull. And the eyes, God, the eyes. They were dark, pitch black, no white, no pupils, just these deep black pits that seemed to suck in the light. And they were fixed on us, staring right through us like we were glass. There was no emotion in them that I could read, but there was something else, something cold, something ancient, something that knew things you didn't want to know. It just stared at us for what felt like forever. In reality, it was probably only a few seconds, maybe 10 at the most. But in that moment, time stretched out, everything else faded away. There was just that creature, those eyes, and us, trapped in the van. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, so hard I thought it might burst. I was barely breathing. I could hear Roy's breathing now, ragged and shallow. The cicadas had faded into the background again, like even they had shut up out of respect for whatever this thing was. Then it moved again. And it wasn't a slow movement this time, it was fast. It took a step, just one step, up the slight slope of the embankment towards the road. But it was the way it moved, effortless, like it weighed nothing at all, even dragging that deer. It was fluid, powerful, like watching a predator shift its weight, ready to spring. And then another step, closer to the road, closer to us. Terror just exploded in me, pure, raw, animal terror. I didn't even think, I just reacted. I grabbed Roy's arm, digging my fingers in, and I screamed. Not a little kid scream, but a full-throated, panicked scream like I was being murdered. "Roy! Roy! Go! Go! Go!" I was yelling, my voice cracking. Tears were already streaming down my face. I was shaking all over. Roy didn't need to be told twice. He snapped out of whatever trance he'd been in. His eyes went wide, finally understanding, finally reacting. He slammed the van into drive, foot down on the gas. The engine roared, tires squealed on the asphalt, spitting gravel and dust. The van lurched forward, throwing me back in my seat. We took off. We just bolted, didn't look back, didn't think, just pure, frantic escape. I was still screaming. Roy was gritting his teeth, his knuckles even whiter now on the steering wheel. The van was fishtailing, swerving all over the road. We were going way too fast, but it didn't matter. Nothing mattered except getting away from that thing. I was still looking straight ahead, tears blurring my vision, when Roy suddenly yells. Not a scream like mine, but a shout, a curse full of adrenaline and fear. Jesus Christ! I whipped my head around, looking back. My heart stopped again, because it was there, behind us, not right behind us. We'd put some distance between us, but it was coming, and it was fast, faster than anything that size should have been. It was bounding, long strides, covering ground with terrifying speed. It was still dragging the deer, incredibly, that dead weight bouncing along behind it, but it wasn't slowing it down, it was crossing the road. Just like that, in 2 or 3 strides it was across the whole width of Route 94 and disappearing into the woods on the other side. Vanished, just gone, swallowed up by the trees like it had never been there at all. But it had been there. We'd both seen it. I knew I hadn't imagined it. Roy hadn't imagined it. We'd both seen it, that creature. Roy kept driving. He drove like a madman, not slowing down until we were miles away, back closer to town, away from that stretch of Route 94, away from those woods. He didn't say a word. Neither did I, not for a long, long time. I just sat there, huddled in my seat, shaking, still crying silently. The image of that thing burned into my eyes. We never got pizza that day. Completely forgot about it. We drove straight home. Roy parked the van, turned off the engine, and just sat there, staring straight ahead, hands still gripping the wheel like he was afraid to let go. I slipped out of the van, my legs wobbly. I ran inside, went straight to my room and shut the door. I didn't come out for hours. Mum came home from work, asked what was wrong, why we didn't get pizza. Roy just mumbled something about changing his mind. I didn't say anything at all. Later, after Mum had gone to bed, Roy came into my room. He sat on the edge of my bed, didn't turn on the light. The room was dark, just the faint glow from the street lamp outside filtering through the curtains. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said in a low voice, Did you see it too?" I just nodded. I couldn't speak. My throat was still tight with fear. "It was real, right? I didn't imagine it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I nodded again, tears welling up again. He was quiet again for a long time. Then he just stood up, still without turning on the light, and left the room. I heard him go to his room and close his door. We never talked about it again. Not really, not ever. It was like we both agreed to just bury it, pretend it never happened. Maybe we were afraid of being laughed at or called crazy. Maybe we were just too scared to even think about it, let alone talk about it. But I never forgot it. Never. Every time I drive down a road lined with trees, especially pines, especially in the summer heat, that image comes back to me. Those dark, empty eyes, that reddish-brown fur, the way it moved, dragging that deer like it was nothing. I know what I saw. Roy knows what he saw. We saw something that day on Route 94 that wasn't supposed to exist. Something monstrous. And I have no idea what it was, where it came from, or why it was there. And honestly, I really don't want to know. Sometimes some things are just better left unseen, unexplained, buried in the dark corners of your memory. Because sometimes the world shows you things that just break the rules. Things that scare you down to your bones and leave you with the feeling that you'll never really shake off. Like a shadow, always there, just at the edge of your vision, reminding you that you saw something you weren't supposed to see. And that pizza? Yeah, we never did get pizza that day. And you know what? To this day, I can't really eat pizza without remembering that hot, dusty road, the smell of pine, the buzz of the cicadas. And those eyes, just those dark, empty, terrifying eyes staring right at me. And I still get chills, even now, just thinking about it, just remembering that day, that awful, terrifying day in the summer of '83 on Route 94, outside of Trinity, Texas. That day, that thing, just out there in the woods, still out there maybe, who knows? And that's the part that really gets to you, isn't it? The not knowing, the never knowing. Story 9. So we followed the signs, took a little detour off the main road. It was one of those back roads that keeps getting narrower and narrower, the kind where you start wondering if you're even going the right way anymore. Eventually, we ended up in this tiny place, Leo, I think it was called. Village of Leo, the sign said. But honestly, it was barely a village. A few houses scattered around, everything looked kinda forgotten, you know. Like time had just passed it by. We found the petroglyph site easy enough, another little sign pointing down a gravel road. We parked in this small lot, just us and no other cars around. It was a hot day, middle of summer, the kind of heat that sticks to you, but it had rained earlier that morning, so everything was still a little damp and steamy. The air was heavy, and the woods smelled really earthy, like wet leaves and soil. There was a trailhead sign for the Petroglyph Loop Trail, about 20 acres, it said, going through a wooded ravine. Sounded like a nice little walk. We grabbed our water bottles, and Mikey got his camera out. He's always snapping pictures of everything. We headed down the trail, and right away, you could tell you were in the woods. Tall trees all around, blocking out most of the sun. It was shady and a little cooler under the canopy, which was nice. At first, it was pretty normal, just a walk in the woods. Birds chirping, squirrels rustling around in the leaves. We were talking and laughing, just enjoying being outside. We got to the petroglyphs themselves after maybe 10 minutes of walking. They were carved into this big sandstone cliff face right by the trail. Pretty cool to see these ancient carvings. Mikey was taking a ton of pictures, getting up close, zooming in. I was reading the information signs, trying to figure out what they all meant. Animals, people, symbols. Stuff that people were carving hundreds of years ago. It was interesting, no doubt. We spent a good while there, just looking at the petroglyphs, taking it all in. And then, things started to get weird. It was subtle at first. I noticed this smell, this kind of rotten smell. Not like garbage, but something else, something organic, but bad. Foul even. Like something dead maybe, but not quite. It was hard to place. I sniffed around, looked at the ground to see if maybe an animal had died nearby or something, but I couldn't see anything. I asked Mikey if he smelled it too, and he wrinkled his nose and said, "Yeah, kinda gross." "What is that?" We both kind of ignored it at first, figuring it was just something in the woods. But then the sounds started. Knocking sounds. Not like someone knocking on a door, but like wood hitting wood, but deep and heavy. Thump, thump, thump. That kind of sound. It wasn't regular, it wasn't like someone chopping wood or anything like that. It was just random thumps, coming from somewhere deeper in the woods. I stopped and listened. The birds had stopped chirping, the squirrels had gone quiet. It was like everything in the forest had just shut up, except for these thumping sounds. They seemed to be coming from all around us, but not from one specific direction, if that makes sense. It was like they were everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Thump, thump, then silence for a while, then another thump somewhere else. Mikey stopped taking pictures. He looked at me, a little confused, a little concerned. "What is that sound, Dad?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "I don't know, buddy," I said, trying to sound casual, but I was starting to feel uneasy myself. Probably just animals or something. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. It didn't sound like animals. It sounded deliberate. We started walking again, a little faster this time. We were heading further into the loop trail, following the path along this small creek. The creek was trickling along, making that nice water sound, but it didn't really drown out the thumping noises. They kept coming, these random heavy thumps from the woods around us, and the smell was getting stronger too, that rotten, sickening smell. It was almost making my stomach turn, and then it happened. The tree. We were walking right next to the creek. The trail was pretty narrow there, just enough room for one person really, and there was this tree right by the edge of the creek, on the uphill side of the trail. A big tree, looked healthy, green leaves, solid trunk, just a normal tree standing there, and I swear I looked at it, it was just there, solid and alive. And then, in the space of maybe a second, maybe less, it just fell. No creaking, no cracking sounds of it breaking, just a sudden loud crash, like an explosion of wood and leaves. It happened so fast, it scared the living daylights out of both of us. We both jumped back, stumbled back, practically tripping over ourselves. The tree crashed down right across the trail, right where we had just been walking. It fell towards the creek, landing with a huge splash and a deep, vibrating thud that went right through the ground and up into my chest. My heart was hammering in my chest. I felt my breath catch in my throat. I stared at the tree, lying there across the trail, blocking our way. It was a big tree, a solid, healthy tree. Just moments before, it was standing upright. Now, it was on the ground, and there hadn't been any wind, no sound of breaking wood before it fell. Just down. Mikey was white as a sheet. He was staring at the tree, his eyes wide. What was that?" he stammered, his voice trembling. I don't know," I said, still trying to catch my breath. "I don't understand." And then I remembered something. Just before the tree fell, right in that split second before the crash, I thought I heard something else, something faint, whispering, indistinct whispers right before the tree went down. It was so quick, so quiet, I almost dismissed it as my imagination, as just the sound of the wind in the leaves or something, but there was no wind. I turned to Mikey. Did you say anything just before that tree fell?" I asked him, my voice sounding shaky. He shook his head, still staring at the fallen tree. "No, why? Did you?" "No," I said, "but I thought I heard something, like whispering, just for a second." He looked at me like I was crazy. "Whispering? Dad, I didn't hear anything, just the tree falling." Maybe it was just my imagination, maybe it was the shock, but I could have sworn I heard it. Whispering, right before the tree fell. A cold feeling went down my spine. It wasn't just the shock of the tree falling. It was more than that. It was this creeping sense of dread, a feeling that something was very wrong, that we weren't alone out there, and that whatever was out there didn't want us there. The woods were completely silent now. Even the creek seemed to be quieter. The only sound was the buzzing in my ears, the sound of my own blood rushing. The foul smell was even stronger now, almost overwhelming. It felt like it was coming from everywhere, like the air itself was thick with this rotting stench. We should go," Mikey said, his voice barely a whisper. He was still looking at the fallen tree, but he was starting to back away, slowly, step by step. "Yeah," I said, finally finding my voice again. "Yeah, let's go." I didn't need any more convincing. Whatever was going on here, it was bad. Something felt deeply, fundamentally wrong. This wasn't just nature being nature. This felt intentional. We started to back away from the tree, slowly at first, then faster. We turned around and started heading back the way we came, back down the trail towards the parking lot. We didn't talk. We just walked. Almost ran, really, looking around nervously, scanning the woods, listening for any sound. The thumping noises started up again, but now they were different. Not just random thumps anymore. They sounded closer, more insistent, and somehow angrier. Thump, 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 thump. Faster, more aggressive, like something was getting closer, like something was following us. My heart was pounding now. My legs felt like lead. I kept looking over my shoulder, trying to see through the trees, but there was nothing to see. Just trees, shadows, darkness under the canopy. But the thumping was getting louder, closer. Thump, 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 right behind us now, or at least it felt like it. I grabbed Mikey's hand and we started running. Not full-out sprinting, but a fast, panicked jog. We stumbled over roots, brushed past bushes, trying to keep on the trail, trying to get out of those woods. The thumping was still there, keeping pace with us, getting louder and louder. And the smell was almost unbearable now, filling my nostrils, making me gag. It felt like I was breathing in death itself. We burst out of the trees, finally, back into the parking lot. I could see our car, parked there in the sun, looking so normal, so safe. I practically dragged Mikey to the car, fumbled with the keys, unlocked the doors, and shoved him inside. I jumped in after him, slammed the door shut, and locked it. Locked all the doors. Like that would help against whatever was in those woods. I turned the key in the ignition, started the engine. The car roared to life, and I threw it into reverse, backed out of the parking spot and spun the wheel. We screeched out of the lot, back onto the gravel road, heading back towards the main road, heading away from those woods as fast as I could. I didn't slow down until we were back on the paved road, miles away from that petroglyph site, miles away from those woods. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but all I could see was the road stretching out behind us. Just empty road. We drove for a long time without saying anything. Just the hum of the tires on the asphalt, the air conditioning blowing cold air into the car. Mikey was staring out the window, pale and silent. I was still shaking, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. Finally, after a long time, Mikey spoke. His voice was still quiet, still a little shaky. "Dad, what was that?" I shook my head. "I don't know, buddy. I honestly have no idea." And I didn't. I still don't. We talked about it a little bit later, tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was just a weird coincidence, I tried to tell myself. Maybe the tree was just old and weak, and it just happened to fall at that exact moment. Maybe the knocking sounds were just woodpeckers or something. Maybe the smell was just something normal in the woods that we didn't recognize. But deep down, I didn't believe any of it. It was too much. Too many things happening at once. The smell, the sounds, the tree falling right in front of us, the feeling of being watched, the whispers. It all added up to something that wasn't natural, something that wasn't normal. We never went back to the petroglyph site. We drove on, finished our road trip, went home. But I still think about it all the time, especially when I'm in the woods. I can't shake that feeling of dread, that sense that there's something out there, something unseen, something angry. And that smell. I can still smell it sometimes, even now in my memory, that rotten, sickening smell of something unholy. And the worst part is, I still don't know what it was, what we experienced out there in those woods that day. And I don't think I ever will. It's just a blank spot. A terrifying, inexplicable blank spot in my memory that I can't fill in, can't understand. And that's the thing that really gets to me, the not knowing, the lingering fear that whatever it was might still be out there, waiting, watching. Story 10. Okay, so this happened a few summers back. I still get chills when I think about it, and honestly, I haven't really told many people about it. Mostly just my buddy who was there with me, you know? But sometimes it just bubbles up in my head, and I feel like I gotta get it out somehow. Figured maybe putting it down here, even anonymously, might help. It was summer in Ohio, real sticky and hot, the kind of heat that just hangs in the air and makes you feel heavy. I live just outside of West Mansfield. Small town, nothing much ever happens, you know the type. Except for this one thing. It started with whispers, really. Like you'd hear snippets here and there, mostly from folks talking at the hardware store or over at the diner. It was always the same vague thing, something big down by the Blackwater River. Blackwater's just this kind of muddy, slow-moving river that runs through the county. Nothing special. At least, I thought it wasn't. The first time I actually heard someone talk about it straight up was from my wife, Sarah. She was talking to her friends, chatting about local gossip like women do. I was out back, building a picnic table for the yard, trying to ignore the heat and swatting flies away. I kinda half listened, mostly just the background noise of them talking and laughing. But then I heard Sarah say something about bigger than a bear standing up, and that kinda made me stop hammering for a second. I walked closer, pretended to need a drink of water from the kitchen just to hear more. They were talking about some thing someone had seen. Down by the Blackwater, yeah, but further out, closer to the woods. They were calling it all sorts of stuff. Some were saying it was just a deer standing on its hind legs or something dumb like that. Others were talking about a bear, a really big one. And then there were the ones who sounded genuinely spooked, talking about something else. I didn't really think much of it. Small towns are always full of rumors, especially in the summer when people are bored and got nothing better to do than talk. But then my buddy Dave, he brought it up too a few days later. Dave's a real practical guy, not one to get caught up in silly gossip. We were grabbing beers down at the Rusty Nail, talking about maybe going fishing that weekend. He leans in a bit, like it's a secret, and says, "You hear anything about that thing down by Blackwater?" I just laughed, took a swig of my beer and said, "Yeah, Sarah and her friends are all in a tizzy about some monster. You buying into that crap?" Dave got serious then, which was unusual for him. "Nah, man, not monsters, but something weird's going on. My uncle, you know Uncle Joe who farms out by the old Harper place, he swears he saw something. Now, Uncle Joe is not one to lie. He's seen some things in his years farming, I'm sure, but he's not a drama queen. So I actually paid attention then." "Saw what?" I asked, a little less dismissive this time. "He was out in the back 40, spraying pesticides or something, and he saw it across the field. Said he thought it was a bear at first, you know, just lumbering along, but then it stood up, on 2 legs, said it was huge, taller than his tractor cab." I frowned. "A bear?" Dave shook his head. "No, man, he said it wasn't a bear. Too skinny, maybe, and the way it moved upright. He said he revved the tractor, you know, kinda to scare it away, see what it was. Said the thing turned and looked right at him, just stared. Then it just walked into the woods like it was nothing." "And Uncle Joe's serious about this?" I asked. Dave nodded. "Dead serious. He showed me something else too." "What?" "Footprints. Massive footprints in his field, like way bigger than any bear track he's ever seen. 4 toes, he said, and spread way, way out. He measured one of the strides, said it was almost 4 feet apart." 4 feet. That's insane. I started to get a little less dismissive. Uncle Joe finding weird tracks after seeing something big. That's a different story than town gossip. The next day, we drove out towards Blackwater, just out of curiosity. We weren't really expecting to find anything, more just wanted to check out the area, see if there was anything to Uncle Joe's story. We drove past Uncle Joe's farm, just saw him out on his tractor, like nothing was wrong. But we went on further, towards where Dave said the tracks were found, towards the woods bordering the river. There were a few other cars pulled over on the side of the road. Local guys mostly, some I recognized. They were standing around talking, pointing towards the woods. It felt strange, like something out of a movie. Everyone gathered, whispering about something nobody could quite explain. We got out and walked over. "What's going on?" Dave asked one of the guys, a guy named Frank, who we knew from high school. Frank looked at us, eyes a little wide. "You hear about it?" he asked back, almost like he couldn't believe we were asking. "Yeah, Uncle Joe told us something," Dave said, nodding towards the woods. Frank just gestured with his hand. "They're in there, man. The prints. Come see." We followed him and a couple of other guys, walking into the edge of the woods. It was thicker than I thought it would be, even near the edge. Bushes and small trees, undergrowth thick on the ground. They led us through some brush, and then there they were. Footprints. Not just footprints, but impressions almost. Like something incredibly heavy had stepped there. They were huge, no joke. Way bigger than any dog, bear, or anything normal I could think of. Definitely 4 toes, like Dave said, long and thick. And the distance between them, yeah, easily 3, maybe 4 feet apart, stride to stride. They weren't bear tracks, that was for sure. Bears have claws, and these didn't. They were just big and weirdly human-shaped, but not human. Just wrong and deep, really deep, like whatever made them weighed a ton. Everyone was just staring at them, quiet. You could feel it in the air, this weird tension. It wasn't just curiosity anymore, it was unease. Like everyone there was starting to think maybe this wasn't just some rumor. Maybe there really was something out there. I still wasn't totally convinced. Maybe some kind of prank. hoaxes happen. But these prints looked real. And Uncle Joe and now all these other people, it just felt heavier than just some joke. We stayed out there for a bit, looked around, took some pictures of the tracks on our phones. Nobody really said much. It was like we were all trying to figure out what to make of it, but nobody wanted to be the first to say what they were really thinking. Fear, maybe, or just bewilderment. Then, a few days later, it happened. To me and Dave, the real thing. It was a Saturday night. Hot again, still that thick summer heat that didn't let up even after dark. We were bored, honestly. Sarah was out with her friends, I had nothing going on. Dave was the same. We decided on a whim to go frog gigging down by the old power lines. There's this little pond near the power line clearing, outside of town a bit. It's not much of a pond, more like a big puddle, but it's always full of bullfrogs in the summer. We used to go there all the time as kids, haven't been in years, but we just thought, why not? So we grabbed our gigs, flashlights, a burlap sack, hopped in my truck and drove out there. It was getting properly dark by then. The sun had gone down a while ago, but it was still twilightish. Moon was just coming up, pale and sickly looking through the haze. As soon as we got out of the truck, the smell hit us. It was awful. Just rank. Like something rotten, but worse. Like garbage mixed with something dead and something else I couldn't quite place. Something chemical, almost. It was heavy and thick, and it just hung in the air. Jesus, Dave coughed, holding his hand over his nose. What the hell is that stink? No idea, I said, wrinkling my nose. Dead animal, maybe? But it was worse than just dead animal. Way worse. We almost turned around right then, honestly. The smell was that bad. But we'd driven out there, had our gear, and figured maybe it'd clear up closer to the pond. Dumb, I know, looking back. We walked towards the pond, flashlights cutting through the gloom. The air was still, not a breeze at all, and the smell just seemed to get stronger the closer we got. The pond was just ahead, maybe 50 yards from the edge of the clearing, by one of the big power line towers. And then we heard it. It wasn't just a noise, it was a scream, but not human. Animal, yeah, but different. It was loud, piercing, and it just ripped through the stillness of the night. It was high-pitched, but deep at the same time, and it vibrated in my chest, like nails on a chalkboard, but 100 times worse, amplified, right inside your skull. It made my blood run cold instantly, like every hair on my body stood on end, and my heart just slammed into my ribs. Dave froze too, flashlight beams shaking all over the place. The scream came again, louder this time, and we both spun around, flashlights sweeping through the dark towards where we thought it came from. And that's when we saw it. Standing right by the base of the power line tower, in the shadows cast by the metal structure, there was something, just a shape at first, dark against the dark. But then it moved and it solidified, somehow became clearer. It was tall, impossibly tall. Taller than the power tower base, easily, which was concrete and solid, probably 8, maybe 10 feet high. This thing towered over it. Just a dark shape, yes, but you could see the outline, even in the shadows. It was upright, standing on 2 legs. My mind just blanked. For a second, I just stared, flashlight beam fixed on it, unable to process what I was seeing. It couldn't be real. It was like something from a nightmare, something you couldn't even properly imagine when you were awake. Dave gasped next to me, a choked sound. Jesus Christ, what is that? The thing didn't move for a second, just stood there, massive and dark, against the backdrop of the power lines. Then it turned its head. At least I think it was its head. Just this dark shape pivoting towards us. And I felt it then. Not saw. Felt. Eyes. I couldn't see them, not properly, not in the dark, but I knew it was looking at us, intently, and it felt heavy, like being stared down by something ancient, something that understood things we couldn't even begin to grasp. Then it moved, slowly at first, just a step, but it was huge step, eating up ground like nothing. Towards the pond, towards us. That was it. Everything went into overdrive. Fight or flight. There was no fight. Not against that. Flight. Pure animal, terror-driven flight. "Run!" I yelled, voice cracking, and didn't wait for Dave, just turned and bolted, away from the pond, away from the thing, back towards the clearing, back towards anywhere that wasn't there. I heard Dave behind me, crashing through the brush, breathing hard. We didn't say anything, couldn't, just ran, blind panic driving us forward. I didn't even think, didn't look back, just kept my feet moving, adrenaline pumping like crazy, heart hammering in my chest. We burst out of the woods and back into the clearing. My truck was still parked there, but no, too far. Not fast enough. Fence. There was a barbed wire fence running along the edge of the field, separating the clearing from the open pasture. We had to get over it. Without slowing down, I just launched myself at it, scrambled over the top wire, feeling the barbs snag my shirt, ripping at my skin, but didn't care. Fell down hard on the other side, onto the rough pasture grass. Dave was right behind me, crashing over the fence too, cursing under his breath. We kept running, across the open field now, towards the road, towards anything. We were gasping for breath, sides aching, lungs burning, but we didn't stop, couldn't stop. The fear was still driving us, that primal terror that just screamed, "Run!" And then I saw them, our bikes, leaning against a tree by the edge of the field, where we'd left them when we walked into the woods, figuring we'd use them to ride around the pond. Godsend. We scrambled for them, fumbled for the locks, threw the chains off, jumped on, and pedaled. Pedaled like our lives depended on it, because in that moment they honestly felt like they did. Down the dirt track, onto the gravel road, and finally onto the paved road. We didn't slow down, didn't stop pedaling until we were back on the main highway, miles away from that pond, miles away from that thing. We rode all the way back to town, didn't say a word the whole way, just pedaled hard and fast, fueled by pure, unadulterated fear. When we finally got back to my truck, parked at my place, we just sat there, leaning against the truck, panting, still shaking. Neither of us spoke for a long, long time. Finally, Dave just whispered, What the hell was that, Larry?" I just shook my head. I had no words, no explanation, just terror. We never went back there, never went back to that pond, never went frog gigging again, for that matter. The gigs are still in my garage, I think, somewhere. I haven't touched them since. We didn't tell anyone, really, beyond a vague "something spooked us" story. If anyone asked why we didn't catch any frogs, we knew nobody would believe us, not really. They'd think we were crazy or drunk or just seeing things, and maybe they'd be right. Maybe we just freaked ourselves out in the dark, in the heat, with that awful smell. But I know what I saw. We both do. We saw something that night. Something big. Something dark. Something wrong. Something that screamed in the night and moved like nothing natural I've ever seen. Something that stood in the shadows by the power lines and looked at us with what? I don't know. But it wasn't friendly. And that smell, I still get a whiff of it sometimes, just a ghost of it in the back of my mind. And it brings it all back. The heat, the darkness, the scream, the shape, the fear. I still can't explain it. Don't even try to anymore, just it happened, and it's something I'll never, ever forget. And I know deep down that Dave won't either. We just ran and never looked back. And sometimes, late at night when it's quiet, I still wonder, what was it? And what if it's still out there, just out there, in the woods, by the power lines, waiting? Story 11. It still messes with me, you know, even now, so many years later. October of 2000. Seems like a lifetime ago, but certain things just stick with you, burned right into your memory. I was way out south of Carrollton, down in that wild, swampy area. Hunting trip, bow hunting specifically. I'd been tracking this big buck for weeks. Seen his tracks, rubs, even caught a glimpse of him once way off in the distance. Knew his patterns, thought I had him figured out. This valley next to the swamp, that was where I was going to get him. It was prime deer territory. Thick woods, water source, plenty of cover. Perfect. Morning started out great, crisp autumn air, sun just peeking through the trees. Beautiful day to be out in the woods, even if the deer weren't cooperating. Sat in my stand all morning. Nothing. Tried still hunting through the woods after lunch, moved slow, quiet as I could, scanning every shadow. Still nothing. Frustration was starting to set in. You know how it is. You put in all the time and effort, and nature just laughs in your face. Late afternoon started creeping in, the shadows getting longer, the air getting cooler. Sun was already dipping below the tree line. Realized the day was pretty much shot. No buck. No deer at all, actually. Not even a doe. Guess they were all smarter than me that day. Started to pack up my gear, slip my quiver back onto my back, making sure my arrows were secure. Checked my bowstring one last time, even though I knew it was fine. Just something to do. Kill time, postpone admitting defeat. Then I heard it. Just a little sound at first. A giggle. A really weird giggle. Not like an adult, not like a teenager, but like a kid. A really young kid. But wrong. Off. Like something trying to be a kid laughing but didn't quite get it right. It cut through the silence of the woods, sharp and unnatural. I froze, every muscle in my body tightening up. Listened hard. No houses out there, not for miles. I knew the area like the back of my hand. Deep woods, mostly swamp and thick brush. Nobody lived out there, not permanently anyway. Closest houses would be a good hike out through rough terrain. Definitely not kids playing distance. The giggle came again, softer this time, like it was further away, or maybe just muffled. Then silence again. Heavy, thick silence that pressed down on you. For a second I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Stress of the hunt, maybe. Just my ears playing tricks. Then another sound. This one wasn't a giggle. It was more like a whimper. A low, shaky sound, like someone was hurt or scared, trying not to cry. Definitely sounded like a kid. A young kid. Maybe lost. Maybe hurt. My hunter instincts went on pause, and something else kicked in. Worry. Concern. Someone needed help. The sounds were coming from behind this big fallen oak. Giant thing. Must have been taken down in a storm years ago. Still mostly intact, though. A huge trunk lying on the ground. Branches and leaves all tangled up. Leaves were mostly brown now. October and all. But still clinging to the branches, creating a kind of wall of foliage around the base of the trunk. Good hiding spot for a deer, I thought absently. Or, you know, a kid. I started moving towards the oak, slow, careful steps. Didn't want to scare whoever was there if it was a kid. "Hello?" I called out, my voice a little shaky even to my own ears. "Is anyone there? Are you okay?" Silence. Only the rustle of leaves in the slight breeze and the blood pounding in my own ears. Kept moving, circling around the side of the fallen tree, keeping the thick trunk between me and where I thought the sounds had come from. Bow still in my hand, but lowered now, more out of habit than any real intention. Wasn't thinking about hunting anymore, just about that whimper, about a kid. I was just about to step over the base of the trunk, where it met the ground. Giant roots sticking out, twisted and gnarled like claws, putting my foot up, ready to climb over. And then it happened. That sound. It wasn't a giggle. It wasn't a whimper. It was nothing I'd ever heard before in my life. It was a roar, but not like a lion or a bear. It was deeper, throatier, like something huge, something animalistic, but wrong, distorted. A woof is the only way I can describe it, but not like a dog woof. Imagine a bull, but if a bull could roar like a gorilla, a deep, rumbling, guttural explosion of sound that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. It hit me in the chest like a punch, literally. I could feel the vibrations in my ribs. My breath hitched in my throat and my heart slammed against my sternum. Fear, pure, raw, animal fear, not just being startled, not just being surprised. This was something primal, something ancient waking up inside me, something that screamed danger, get away, run. I stumbled back, tripped over a root, almost fell, dropped my bow, clattering against the fallen oak. Didn't even care. My hand went instinctively to my belt, fumbling for my hunting knife. Pulled it out of its sheath, the cold steel suddenly feeling like the only solid thing in the world. My fingers tightened around the handle, white-knuckle grip. Mind racing, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. What the hell was that? Bear? No. Didn't sound like any bear I'd ever heard. Mountain lion? No way. Too deep. Too unnatural. Wolf? We had wolves in the area, but that wasn't a wolf howl, not even close. This was something else, something big, something dangerous. Panic started to bubble up, hot and acidic in my gut. I scrambled back further away from the fallen oak, putting distance between me and whatever made that sound. My eyes were fixed on the tangled mass of branches and leaves, trying to see through the gloom. The sun was really going down now, the woods getting darker by the second, shadows stretching long and distorted, playing tricks on my eyes. I fumbled for an arrow, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. Managed to knock it onto the bowstring, drawing back the arrow, pointing it at the base of the fallen oak. My knuckles were white, my arm trembling with tension and adrenaline. "Who's there?" I yelled, my voice cracking, weak. "Show yourself! I'm armed!" Pathetic. I sounded pathetic, like I was trying to convince myself more than whatever was behind that tree. Silence again, but this time it wasn't the same kind of silence. This silence was heavy, charged, like something was still there, watching, listening, breathing, but holding its breath, waiting. I kept staring, straining my eyes in the fading light, trying to see movement, anything. Nothing. Just shadows, just leaves, just the heavy, suffocating silence. I felt exposed, vulnerable, even though I had my knife and bow. They felt useless, against whatever that was. They felt like toys. My mind kept replaying that sound, that woof. It echoed in my head, vibrating in my chest all over again. And with it came a feeling, a certainty that whatever made that sound wasn't natural, wasn't something I recognized, wasn't normal. I knew I had to get out of there. Now. Sun was almost completely gone, darkness closing in fast. My truck was miles away, parked back up near the main road. Long walk. But staying here, waiting, hoping, that was insane. I had to go. Slowly, carefully, I started to back away, keeping my eyes fixed on the fallen oak, arrow still nocked, knife still clutched in my hand. Every step felt like walking on glass. Every rustle of leaves made me jump. Paranoia was creeping in, cold fingers wrapping around my brain. What if it was circling around? What if it was waiting for me to turn my back? Got to my backpack, still lying on the ground where I'd dropped it when I'd heard the giggle. Grabbed it, slung it over my shoulder, careful not to take my eyes off the tree. Backing, until I felt like I was far enough away, far enough to at least have a chance to run. Turned and ran. Full-out sprint, crashing through the undergrowth, branches whipping at my face, thorns tearing at my clothes. Didn't care, just needed to get away, needed to put as much distance as possible between me and that tree. And that sound. Kept running until I was gasping for breath, lungs burning, legs aching. Slowed to a fast walk, still moving, still listening, still looking over my shoulder every few seconds. The woods were silent again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This silence was different, empty, like whatever had been there was gone, or waiting somewhere else. As I climbed up a small hill, I got that feeling. The feeling of being watched. Heavy, intense, like eyes burning into the back of my neck. I stopped, heart hammering, adrenaline still surging through my veins, listened, looked around. Nothing, just the trees, the shadows, the deepening gloom. But the feeling was still there, stronger now, like something was nearby, too close, watching me, waiting. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Not loud, not crashing through the brush like mine had been. Subtle, quiet, but definitely footsteps. Moving parallel to me, over to my left along the edge of the trees, keeping pace with me, following me. Stopped. Footsteps stopped too. Started walking again, faster now. Footsteps started again, matching my pace. Stopped again. Footsteps stopped. Started running. Footsteps started running, staying parallel, staying just out of sight in the shadows of the trees. I was being followed. I knew it. And whatever was following me wasn't human. Human footsteps don't sound like that in the woods. These were lighter, quicker, almost padding, like paws, but too heavy to be just paws, too substantial. Panic went into overdrive. My breath came in ragged gasps, sweat dripping down my face, stinging my eyes. Vision started to blur around the edges, tunnel vision setting in, just focused on the path ahead, on putting one foot in front of the other, on getting away from whatever was following me. There was a small grove of trees ahead, thick and dark, stretching out into a small, open pasture, a potential ambush spot. I knew it, felt it in my gut. Running straight through there would be suicide. It could be waiting, watching, ready to pounce. I swerved suddenly, sharply to the right, angling away from the grove, running across the open pasture instead. Exposed, vulnerable, but at least I could see. See if anything came out of the trees, see if it was still following. Kept glancing back over my shoulder, heart hammering in my chest. Saw nothing, just the dark line of trees receding into the distance. But I could still feel it, still feel the eyes, still hear the silent footsteps, keeping pace, mirroring my movements just beyond the edge of my vision. The pasture seemed to stretch on forever, legs burning, lungs screaming for air. Finally, I saw it. My truck, parked on the edge of the woods, just beyond the pasture. Salvation, safety, hope. I poured on the last of my speed, legs pumping, arms driving, pushing myself harder than I ever had before. Truck was getting closer, closer, closer. Could see the glint of metal in the fading light, could see the dark shape of the cab, could almost taste freedom. Reached the truck, fumbled for the keys in my pocket, fingers numb, clumsy. Dropped them, cursed under my breath, scrambled on the ground, found them, finally managed to jam the key into the lock, ripped the door open, practically dove inside, slammed the door shut, locked it again, leaned back against the seat, gasping, shaking, eyes wide, staring back at the woods. Silence. Complete silence. No footsteps, no sounds. Just the whisper of the wind in the trees, and the pounding of my heart, and the ringing in my ears. Stayed there for a long time, just staring, breathing, trying to calm down. Tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, just stress, just the woods playing tricks. But I knew better. I knew what I'd heard, I knew what I'd felt, and I knew deep down that I hadn't imagined those footsteps, that I hadn't been alone out there. Started the truck, engine roaring to life, shattering the silence. Slammed it into gear, tires spitting gravel, and I was gone. Drove like a maniac, not stopping, not slowing down, not even looking back in the rearview mirror. Just driving, until I was miles away from those woods, miles away from that fallen oak tree, miles away from that sound. Never went back there. Never hunted in those woods again. Too scared, too freaked out. And even now, all these years later, sometimes late at night, when it's quiet and dark, I still hear it. That giggle, that whimper, and then that woof. And I remember that feeling, that cold, primal fear. And I know deep down that whatever was out there that day, it's still out there, somewhere, watching, waiting. And I still don't know what it was. And I never want to find out. Just still gets to me, you know? Just messes with me. Story 12. The first time was back in 2013. Spring, I remember, because the windows were down and the air was cool but smelled like everything was waking up. My daughter Caitlin was with me. She was maybe 10 then, small for her age, all eyes and quick to point out every cow or tractor we passed. We were heading back from visiting my sister in Delroy. It was late, probably pushing 11, and Highway 39 was pretty deserted that time of night. You know how it gets out there. Total darkness once you're away from the little towns, just black fields on either side, and trees crowding in close to the road. We were just talking, probably about school, or whatever 10-year-olds talk about, when headlights swept across us, blindingly bright. I blinked, squinted, the usual drill when a car's coming the other way. But then something else happened. Something moved in those headlights, in that split second of glare. It was like a shadow, but huge, like ridiculously huge. It crossed the road in front of us, from the left ditch to the right in just a couple of strides. Strides that were way too long, way too powerful for any person or any animal I'd ever seen. The headlights were gone as fast as they'd come, the other car whizzing by, and suddenly we were plunged back into darkness. But for those 2 seconds, maybe even less, in that blinding light, I saw it. Or at least I saw something. It was like a massive silhouette, upright, walking or running. It was hard to tell because it was so fast and the light was so intense, but it was definitely on 2 legs, and it was tall, taller than a person, taller than any deer I've ever seen. My heart slammed in my chest. I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. Caitlin was quiet beside me. I think she felt the shift in the car, the sudden tension. "Did you see that?" I asked her, my voice shaky, sounding way calmer than I felt inside. She was quiet for a second. Then, in that little voice of hers, she said, "Yeah, Mommy." What was it? I wanted to say it was a deer, or maybe a cow that got out of a field, something normal, something explainable. But even as the words formed in my head, I knew they were lies. It wasn't a deer. Deer are fast, but they're not that big, and they don't move like that. And cows, well, cows just aren't built to sprint across a highway on 2 legs. "I don't know, honey," I said finally, and it was the honest truth. Maybe just a big dog. It sounded weak, even to my own ears. A dog. This thing had been enormous. And the way it moved, it wasn't like a 4-legged animal trying to get out of the road. It was upright, balanced, like it was meant to be standing like that. We drove the rest of the way home in silence, both of us staring out into the darkness, the radio off. Every rustle in the trees, every shadow that flickered in the edge of my headlights made me jump. I kept replaying those few seconds in my head, trying to make sense of it, trying to put a label on what I'd seen. But nothing fit. Absolutely nothing. I told myself I was tired, stressed. Maybe the headlights played tricks with my eyes. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. But Caitlin had seen it too. And I knew deep down I hadn't imagined it. There was something out there on Highway 39 that shouldn't have been. Life went on. We didn't talk about it much after that night. Caitlin, being a kid, seemed to forget it pretty quickly. I tried to forget it too, to push it to the back of my mind. But every now and then, when I was driving at night, especially in the country, that image would flash back clear as day, and I'd get that same cold, prickly feeling on the back of my neck. Then, 2 years later, it happened again. Worse this time, clearer, and a whole lot more terrifying. It was summer of 2015. July, hot and humid, the kind of Ohio summer where the air hangs heavy and still. Caitlin was older, 13, angsty, and rolling her eyes at everything. She had a boyfriend then, a nice enough kid named Mark. We were picking him up from his place after he'd spent the afternoon with Caitlin. His family lived out near Carroll Hills School, off Highway 9. Another back road, lots of trees, dark even during the day in some spots. It was early evening, maybe around 9, still some light in the sky but fading fast. We were on Highway 9, heading north, just past the school. There's a stretch there where the road cuts through some woods, thick woods on both sides. It always feels a little isolated there, even in broad daylight. That night it felt heavy, quiet, but not peaceful quiet. More like waiting quiet. I was driving, Caitlin was in the passenger seat, and Mark was in the back, messing with his phone. We were talking normal stuff, probably complaining about the heat or something equally boring, and then it happened. Not headlights this time, no warning at all, just movement in the trees to the right of the road. A rustle, louder than just leaves in the wind, a crashing sound like branches breaking, and then it stepped out. It was on the road, right in front of us, standing there, blocking the entire lane. This time, there were no oncoming cars, no blinding headlights. This time, it was in the low light of dusk, and I could see it, really see it. And that's what's so much worse, knowing you really saw it, knowing your eyes weren't playing tricks. It was huge, towering. I don't even know how to describe the size. Bigger than any person, bigger than any bear. Maybe 8 feet tall, 10? I honestly couldn't tell. It was just massive, a dark shape against the darkening woods, and it was standing on 2 legs, upright, just like the first time. But this time, I saw more than just a silhouette. I saw details, fuzzy details in the fading light, but details nonetheless. It was covered in fur or hair, dark, matted, almost black in the dim light. It wasn't smooth like a bear's fur, more shaggy, like it hadn't been groomed in years. Its legs were thick, powerful looking, and its arms, they hung down past its knees, long, heavy arms. Its head, I didn't get a good look at its head. It was mostly in shadow, but I could see a broad chest, a thick neck, and those arms, swinging slightly at its sides. It just stood there, staring at us, or at least it seemed like it was staring at us. I couldn't see its eyes clearly, just dark patches in the shadow of its face. But I could feel its presence, heavy, intimidating, like it was assessing us, deciding what to do. The car was still moving forward, slow, but still moving. I must have instinctively taken my foot off the gas, my brain frozen, my hands gripping the wheel so hard they were probably leaving imprints in the plastic. Caitlin gasped beside me. I heard Mark make a sound in the back seat, a kind of choked off, "Whoa!" We were getting closer, closer and closer. I could see more detail now, the shaggy fur, the massive shoulders, the sheer size of it, and that posture, so upright, so human-like, but completely, terrifyingly not human. Time seemed to slow down. Every second stretched out, agonizingly long. I remember thinking stupidly that I should honk the horn, as if a car horn would scare this thing away, as if it would even notice. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it moved. It didn't run, it didn't sprint, it just stepped off the road, into the woods on the other side, just 2 or 3 long strides, and it was gone, vanished into the trees, swallowed by the undergrowth and the deepening darkness, just like that. 1 second it was there, a monstrous shape blocking the road. The next, it was gone, leaving only the rustling leaves and the pounding of my heart in my ears. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding slightly on the gravel shoulder. We jolted to a stop. Silence descended in the car, thick and heavy as the summer air. Nobody spoke for a long, long time. Finally, Caitlin whispered, her voice barely audible, "Mom, what was that?" Mark was breathing hard in the back seat. I could hear him. His breath was shaky, shallow. Did you guys see that?" he stammered. "Yeah, Mark," I said, my voice still trembling. "We saw it. It looked like a..." He trailed off, searching for words that just weren't there. "I don't know what it looked like," I said honestly. "I have no idea." We sat there for what felt like forever, the engine idling, the silence broken only by our ragged breathing. Nobody wanted to move. Nobody wanted to speak. We were all just frozen, staring at the spot where it had stood, the spot where it had disappeared into the woods. Finally, I put the car in drive, slowly, cautiously. I inched forward, my eyes scanning the trees, every shadow, every movement. But there was nothing, just trees and bushes and darkness. We drove the rest of the way to Mark's house in silence, dropping him off without a word, without even really looking at his parents when they came to the door. The ride home was worse than the first time, way worse, because this time I'd seen it clearly. There was no mistaking it, no blaming it on headlights or tiredness or my imagination. This time I knew beyond any doubt that I'd seen something impossible, something that shouldn't exist. We haven't seen it again since. Not in those woods, not anywhere. We avoid driving those roads at night now if we can. Caitlin still gets quiet if we even mention Highway 9 or Highway 39. And Mark, I don't know if he even remembers it now, probably blocked it out. Kids are good at that. But I remember. Every detail is burned into my memory. The size, the shape, the way it moved, the feeling of wrongness just radiating off of it. It's not just fear, you know? It's something else. A sense of violation. Like you've seen something you were never meant to see. Something that's hidden from the normal world for a reason. People tell you there are no monsters, that everything can be explained. But I know what I saw, twice. And I know there are things out there in the dark, in the woods, in the quiet places of this world, that we just can't explain. Things that make no sense, things that are just wrong. And sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night and the road gets dark and empty, I still glance at the trees on the side of the road, just for a second, just to make sure, because even after all this time, a part of me is still waiting to see it again, still waiting for that shape to step out of the darkness, back onto the road. And I don't know what I'd do if it did. I really don't. Story 13. Okay, so this happened a while back now, but it's still stuck in my head, you know, like one of those things you just can't shake off. It was August 29th, 2015. Me and Andrea, my wife, we'd just got this brand new camper. A little thing, but it was ours. We were itching to try it out, get away from the city noise for a bit. We picked Salt Fork State Park, Ohio. Seemed peaceful online, good reviews, hiking trails, the whole shebang. We got there in the early afternoon, got the camper set up in our spot. It was hot, really hot, even for August. That thick, sticky summer heat. We sweated just unpacking. The campsite was decent, trees around for shade, not too crowded. Everything felt pretty normal, like any other camping trip, just with a new toy to play with. We messed around with the camper for a while, figuring out the lights and the stove and all that. Andrea was excited about the little kitchen. I was just happy to be outside. Later, when the sun started to go down a bit and it cooled off a tad, not much but a tad, we decided to check out one of the trails. Guns Glen Loop, it was called. Sounded easy enough, maybe a couple of miles. Something to stretch our legs before dinner. We grabbed our water bottles, told each other we'd be back before dark, and headed towards the trailhead. The trailhead was right near the campground, easy to find. We stepped onto the path and right away you could feel the difference in the woods. It was darker under the trees, the air felt still and heavy. Even with the heat, it was cooler, but not in a refreshing way. More like a damp, shadowy coolness. Andrea was in front, picking her way through. She's always been a bit quicker on her feet than me. Kept having to duck under branches and wipe away spider webs. She hates spider webs in the face. I was just strolling behind, taking it all in. You know, the smell of the woods, the sounds of the birds, that rustling in the leaves. Normal woods stuff. We'd been walking maybe 15-20 minutes, not that far in when I saw it. Up ahead, maybe 50 yards or so, off the trail to the right. In the trees, but not in the trees, if that makes sense. It was like it was walking parallel to the trail, just inside the woods. At first, I just thought it was another hiker, maybe someone going off trail for some reason, but something about it was off right away. The way it moved, for one thing. It was deliberate, I guess. Not like someone just rambling through the woods, more like it knew exactly where it was going and how to get there, even though there wasn't a path. And then there was the clothes. Like I said, it was brutally hot that day, sweating your guts out hot, and this thing was wearing a jacket, a heavy jacket. I remember thinking, man, that dude must be boiling. It wasn't like a light windbreaker. It looked thick, almost like a winter coat, but brown, a dirty brown, and patched. That's the weird thing, it wasn't just a plain brown jacket. It had these patches of grey, mottled, patchy grey stuff all over the back and shoulders, like someone had sewn pieces of something else onto it randomly. And it was big, I mean big, taller than me for sure, and I'm 6 feet. But not just tall, wide too, like it was bulky under that jacket. Broad shoulders, thick neck. It moved with a heavy kind of gait too, like it weighed a ton. I tried to get a better look, squinting through the trees. It was walking in and out of shadows, so it was hard to get a clear picture. I couldn't see its face, just the back of its head and shoulders. The head seemed small for the body somehow, or maybe the shoulders were just huge. Something about the proportions felt wrong. I pointed. "Andrea, look," I whispered, even though I don't know why I whispered. She turned around, a bit annoyed because I'd stopped her. "What?" she said, brushing a hair out of her face. I gestured with my head towards where I'd seen the figure. "Over there, in the woods. See that guy?" She squinted, trying to look through the trees. "Guy? Where? I don't see anyone." I kept watching, trying to track it. It had slowed down a little, still moving parallel to the trail, but now it was closer to the deeper woods, thicker trees. "Yeah, just there, walking, with the jacket." I tried to describe the jacket, the brown color, the patches. Andrea still couldn't see it. "Honey, I don't see anyone. Are you sure you saw someone?" I was starting to feel a bit foolish. Maybe it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, but I knew I saw something big, in a heavy jacket, walking through the woods in the summer heat. It felt wrong, just fundamentally wrong, and then it just disappeared. It was walking between two thick trees and then gone. Just like that, vanished into thin air. 1 second it was there, the next, nothing. I stared at the spot where it had been, my eyes scanning the trees, trying to see if it had just ducked behind something or if it was still there, just hidden. But there was nothing, just trees and bushes and shadows. "See?" Andrea said, shaking her head a little. "There's nobody there, Dan. You probably just saw a tree trunk or something." I know what I saw. It wasn't a tree trunk. It moved, it walked, it wore a damn jacket. But I didn't want to argue. She was already starting to look a little impatient. So I just shrugged. "Maybe," I said, even though I didn't believe it for a second. "Maybe it was just my imagination." We started walking again, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I kept looking back towards the woods, towards where I'd seen the figure. I felt uneasy, like we weren't alone, like something was watching us, even though I couldn't see anything anymore. And then the owls started. It wasn't just one owl, it was like 3, maybe more, and they were all hooting at the same time, but from different directions, like they were surrounding us. The first hoot came from somewhere to our left, deeper in the woods, a deep, resonant hoot, the kind that makes your chest vibrate. Then, almost immediately after, another one answered from the right, closer to the trail, but still in the trees. And then a third one from behind us, back the way we'd come. It wasn't a normal owl sound. I mean, I've heard owls before. Camping, hiking, living in the countryside sometimes, they hoot. It's normal, but this was different. It wasn't just the sound, it was the way they were doing it. Like they were communicating, like they were talking to each other, but talking about us. And the sound itself, it was distorted somehow, lower pitched than a normal owl hoot, almost guttural and louder, way louder. It echoed through the woods, bouncing off the trees. Andrea stopped dead in her tracks. "What the heck is that?" she whispered, her eyes wide. She'd heard it too. "Owls," I said, trying to sound casual, but my voice was tighter than I wanted it to be. "Just owls. But 3 of them? At the same time? And they sound weird." She was looking around, her head swiveling, trying to pinpoint where the sounds were coming from. "It sounds like they're everywhere." They kept hooting, not constantly, but in bursts. Hoot, 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 hoot. And then silence for a few seconds, just enough to make you think maybe it was over, and then they'd start again, from a different direction, or the same direction but closer now. It was like they were moving, closing in, surrounding us. A cold feeling went down my spine. It wasn't just the owls, it was everything all at once. The heat, the woods, the figure in the jacket, the sudden darkness closing in. And now these weird, distorted owl hoots echoing all around us. It felt wrong, profoundly, deeply wrong, like we had stepped into something we shouldn't have. Let's just go back," Andrea said, her voice trembling slightly. She turned around, facing back the way we came, towards the trailhead, towards the campground. I didn't argue. I just wanted to get out of there, out of those woods, away from those sounds. We started walking, quickly at first, then almost running. The path seemed to stretch out in front of us, longer than it had been coming in. The trees seemed to close in, the shadows deeper, the air colder. The owl hoots followed us. They didn't stop. They just kept going, hooting and echoing, sometimes closer, sometimes further away, but always there, surrounding us, pushing us, driving us back towards the open. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see, I don't know what. The figure again, the owls themselves perched on branches, their eyes glowing in the twilight. I didn't see anything. Just trees and shadows and the trail winding ahead. But the feeling was still there, that feeling of being watched, of being followed, of being hunted. We practically ran the last bit of the trail, bursting out of the woods and back onto the campground road, gasping for breath. The sudden light of the campground, the noise of other campers, the normalcy of it all. It was like stepping back into reality. For a second, it was almost like the woods, the figure, the owls. It was all just a bad dream. But then, as we walked back to our campsite, I heard it again. A faint hoot from the edge of the woods. Just one, distant but unmistakable. They were still there. Or it was still there. Whatever it was. We got back to the camper, slammed the door shut and locked it. Andrea was pale, her eyes wide. "What was that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What was that noise? And did you really see someone in the woods?" I told her about the figure again, about the jacket, the size, the way it disappeared, about the owls, the way they sounded, the way they surrounded us. She listened, her face getting paler and paler. She didn't say I was imagining things this time. I think she'd heard the owls too. She'd felt the fear too. We didn't go outside again that night. We stayed locked in the camper, all the windows closed, the curtains drawn. We could still hear the owls sometimes, faintly from far away, but they were still there. We didn't sleep much. Every little noise outside made us jump. We just sat there listening, waiting for morning to come. As soon as it was light, we packed up. We skipped breakfast, skipped coffee, skipped everything. We just wanted to get out of there. We hitched up the camper, started the truck, and drove away. We didn't even stop to check out the park properly. Didn't do any of the other trails. Nothing. Just gone. We never talked about it much afterwards. Not really. It was like something we both experienced but couldn't explain and didn't want to relive. We went camping a few times since then, different places, but it's not the same anymore. That feeling is still there, somewhere in the back of my mind. That feeling of unease, of being watched, of something unnatural lurking just outside the light. And sometimes late at night when it's quiet, I still hear it. Just in my head maybe, but I hear it. that low, guttural hoot. And I remember that figure in the woods, the heavy jacket in the summer heat, disappearing between the trees, and I wonder, what the hell was that thing? And what were those owls talking about? I still don't know, and I don't think I ever will. It just happened, and that's the thing that really gets to you, isn't it? When there's no explanation, when you just have to live with the feeling, the fear, and the unanswered questions, and that feeling never really goes away. Story 14. Okay, so this happened a while back, but it's still crystal clear in my mind, like it was yesterday. It messes with you, you know? Something like this happens, and you're never quite the same afterwards. I'm not even sure why I'm writing this down now, maybe just to finally put it out there, somewhere other people might, I don't know, understand a little, maybe believe me. It was August 22nd, 2015. Yeah, I remember the exact date because after what we saw, we made damn sure we logged everything, every detail we could think of. We were at Salt Fork State Park. Me and my research partner Dave, we were out there looking into some local wildlife patterns. Nothing too crazy, mostly tracking deer movements, documenting bird sightings, that kind of stuff. We'd been doing field work in Ohio parks for years. Pretty routine. This park, Salt Fork, we'd been to it plenty of times. Beautiful place, you know, real peaceful, lots of trees, that big lake. You get the picture. Never felt anything was off. Never heard any weird stories about it either, at least not that I recall. That day was pretty normal. Hot for late August, but not unbearable. We'd spent the morning checking trail cams we'd set up a few weeks prior deeper in the park. Everything was normal. Deer, squirrels, the usual suspects. Nothing out of the ordinary showed up on the cameras either. By afternoon, we were heading back towards the park entrance, kind of looping back through some trails near Sugar Tree Fork. We were just chatting about lunch, what kind of beer we'd grab later. Regular stuff. We got to this bridge. It wasn't a big bridge, just a wooden one crossing over Sugar Tree Fork Creek. The creek itself was pretty small there, mostly rocks and shallow water. It was late afternoon. The sun was starting to go down a bit, casting long shadows everywhere. Made the woods look kind of different, you know? Everything got a little stretched and darker. I remember I stopped on the bridge. I was looking west, just kind of taking it in. The woods were dense there, really thick, lots of undergrowth. That's when it happened. From behind this huge, overgrown bush, it was almost like a wall of leaves. Something moved. It was big. At first, honestly, I thought it was a deer, a really big buck or something. But then it stepped out, just a few feet from the edge of the trees, into a little patch of open ground. And it wasn't a deer. Not even close. It was standing there, just for a second. I mean, maybe 5-6 seconds, tops. But those seconds felt like they stretched out forever. Like time just slowed down to a crawl. In that moment, everything else just disappeared. The woods, the creek, Dave next to me, all gone. Just me and it. The first thing that hit me was the size. It was massive, taller than any man easily, like way taller. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing towered over me, even at a distance. It was built like a brick house, but also fluid. I don't know how to explain it. Solid muscle, but it moved with this easy power. And then there was the face, or lack of features maybe. It had no facial hair, completely clean-shaven if you could even call it shaved, because it didn't look like it ever had hair there. And no neck, seriously, no neck. Its head just sat right on its shoulders. Its forehead was low, like it sloped straight back from its brow ridges. That brow was heavy too, casting a shadow over its eyes. Those eyes, they were dark, deep, dark and intense. They met mine immediately. It was looking right at me, staring, you know. It wasn't aggressive, not exactly, but there was something in that gaze, something primal, something evaluating. It was looking through me almost. I know it sounds crazy, but that's how it felt, like it was taking me apart with its eyes. Underneath that heavy brow, I saw these wide cheekbones, really pronounced, and a nose, but it was flat, squashed almost, not like a human nose at all, and the mouth wide, really wide, with thin lips, almost like just a slit in its face. It wasn't smiling, definitely not. It was just there, observing. Its chest, it was enormous, broad, thick, and then its torso narrowed down to its waist like an upside-down triangle, V-shaped, like one of those bodybuilders, but on a scale I'd never seen before, never imagined. I could see muscles moving under its skin, even when it was just standing still, and the skin itself, dark, real dark, almost black, but with a reddish-brown tint to it, like deep mahogany wood, and it was covered in fur, dark, reddish-brown fur, not long and shaggy, but short and dense like velvet. It covered its whole body as far as I could see, except for its face. I remember thinking, in that split second, it was like someone had taken all the features of a human face and just distorted them, made them wrong, just off in a way that made your stomach clench. And the body, powerful, unbelievably powerful, like it was built for something beyond human strength. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. It just turned, like it made a decision. No warning, no sound. It just pivoted on one foot and moved. I watched it take off towards the creek bank. Each stride was huge. I swear each step was at least 6 feet long. Boom, boom, boom. And it was gone. Back into the trees, swallowed up by the undergrowth. The sound of it moving. That's something I can't forget either. Not loud, not like crashing through the woods. More like a heavy weight moving through soft ground. A kind of rustle, a snap of branches, but muffled, like it was moving deliberately, but with immense force behind every movement. After it vanished, I just stood there, frozen, staring at the spot where it had been, behind that bush. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I don't know how long I was like that, just standing there, not moving, not breathing almost. Then Dave's voice snapped me out of it. He was saying my name. "Eric, Eric, what the hell? What did you just see?" I turned to him. His face was white. His eyes were wide too, but not just with shock, with fear. I could see it in his face. He'd seen it too. Did you see that?" It was all I could manage to say. My voice sounded shaky, distant, like it wasn't even mine. Dave nodded slowly. Yeah, I saw it. What was that?" We just stood there on the bridge for a few minutes, both of us silent, trying to process what we'd just witnessed. The sun was lower now, the shadows longer, deeper. The woods felt different, heavy, ominous. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was watching. We started talking then. Hesitantly at first, then faster, as the adrenaline started to wear off and the questions came flooding in. We described what we'd seen to each other, trying to make sense of it, trying to find some rational explanation. But there wasn't one. There was just what we'd seen, this massive, fur-covered thing. We agreed on the details, the size, the shape, the face, the fur, the eyes. We both saw the same thing. We weren't imagining it. It was real, standing right there in front of us. "Could it have been a bear?" Dave asked finally, his voice still hushed. I shook my head. No bear looks like that. Bears are bulky, yeah, but this was different. The way it stood, the face, and the skin, and the way it moved. Bears lumber. This thing, it moved like a predator, like it was built to hunt. But what else could it be? Dave was running a hand through his hair, his voice rising in pitch. "A person, dressed up?" I scoffed. "A person? In that? No way. No costume could make someone look like that, and be that big, and move like that. And the face, Dave, the face. No mask can make a face look like that." We were getting nowhere, trying to fit what we saw into boxes that just weren't big enough. The sun was starting to set properly now. The air was cooling down. We knew we had to get out of there, back to the car, back to somewhere that felt normal. Let's just go back," Dave said finally. Tomorrow. Tomorrow we can come back. Check it out in daylight. Maybe we can find something. Tracks, anything. It sounded weak, but it was all we had. We turned and walked back towards the bridge, then across it, and followed the trail back to the park road. The whole time, I kept looking back over my shoulder, towards the woods, feeling like we were being watched. The next morning, we went back. First thing, neither of us slept well. I kept seeing those dark eyes in my mind, that wrong face. Dave was quiet and jumpy, kept looking around nervously. We went straight back to the bridge. The sun was higher now, the light different. It was just woods and creek again, normal woods and creek. But it didn't feel normal, not to me, not to Dave. We walked to the spot where we'd seen it, the bush. It was easy to find, and it was flattened. Not just the bush, but the weeds and grass around it in a wide circle, like something heavy had stood there and moved around. And then we saw them, tracks, in the soft earth near the creek bank. Huge tracks, bigger than any human foot, bigger than any bear track I'd ever seen. 3 toes, I think. Or maybe 4, it was hard to tell exactly in the soft ground, but thick, massive toes. And the size, we got out our measuring tape. From heel to toe, they were about 16 inches long, 16 inches, and 10 inches wide at the widest part, a monster footprint. We followed the tracks for a short way, heading down towards the creek and into the thicker woods. They were clear for a while, then they disappeared, lost in the undergrowth, or maybe the ground got harder. We looked around, searched the area. We found more flattened vegetation, broken branches, disturbed earth. It looked like something big and heavy had been there and moved through there. We took photos of everything. The flattened bush, the tracks, the area around the sighting. We measured the footprint, took photos of the measuring tape next to it. We documented everything meticulously, like proper scientists, trying to find some solid, tangible proof of something unbelievable. We went back to the park office, showed the photos to a ranger. He looked at them, listened to our story. He was polite, but you could see the disbelief in his eyes. He said it could be a bear track, distorted in the mud, or maybe someone playing a prank with oversized boots. He suggested we might have been mistaken about what we saw. Politely, of course, but that's what he meant. We didn't push it. What could we say? No, really, we saw a massive, hairy, necklace thing with a distorted human face. Yeah, that would go down well. We just nodded, thanked him, and left. We talked about it a lot after that, me and Dave. Went over every detail again and again, trying to make sense of it, looking for explanations. We looked up local wildlife, rare animal sightings, even cryptid stuff online. Bigfoot stories, that kind of thing. I know, sounds ridiculous, but we were desperate to find something, anything that could explain what we saw. We found stories, of course, people claiming to see things in the woods, big, hairy things, creatures that defy explanation, but they were just stories, usually blurry photos, grainy videos, always unreliable witnesses, nothing concrete. And that's what we had, kind of. We had the memory. We had the photos of the footprint, the flattened bush, but no real proof, nothing that would convince anyone who wasn't there. And even for us, it felt like a dream sometimes, like maybe we had imagined it, or misremembered something. But I know what I saw. Dave knows what he saw. We both saw it. That thing, standing there, staring at us, in the woods by Sugar Tree Fork. And I still can't explain it. To this day, I don't know what it was, or what it wanted, or why it disappeared so quickly. All I know is it was real, and it was terrifying. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the woods, or even just walking in the park at dusk, I still get that feeling that someone is watching, that something is out there, still out there, somewhere in the shadows, with those dark, unblinking eyes. And I can't shake the feeling that it might be watching me, still. Story 15. I'm Joe Reynolds, and I live around Shade, Ohio. Out in Athens County, pretty much all woods and hills. I've been hunting since I was old enough to hold a rifle, learned from my dad and grandpa. Private land is mostly what I hunt. A buddy of mine owns a good patch not too far from my place. Got a decent stand set up there, nothing fancy, just gets the job done. It was late fall, getting close to dusk, that real quiet time in the woods when the shadows start to get long. I was up in my stand, settled in, waiting to see if anything would wander out. It's a small box stand, just enough room for one guy, plywood walls and roof. Nothing special, but keeps the wind off you. It was a cool evening, starting to get that nip of frost in the air. The kind that makes the leaves crackle a little under your boots. Anyways, I'm sitting there, watching this small clearing in front of me. Got some oaks all around. My stand is built up against a big old oak, nice and sturdy. I'd seen a few does earlier in the season around there, hoping maybe a buck would show. And then these two deer just kind of appear, real quiet like they do. A doe and her fawn. They were maybe 40, 50 yards out, just browsing, didn't even know I was there. Beautiful animals, just peaceful, eating away, totally relaxed. I was just watching them, wasn't even thinking about shooting, honestly. Just enjoying the quiet and watching these deer. The sun was starting to go down behind the trees. Everything was getting that kind of soft, golden light, you know. Real pretty. And then, out of nowhere, I hear this crack. Not like a little twig snapping. This was loud, like someone took a baseball bat to a tree trunk. It sounded like it came from right behind me. I mean, right behind my stand, almost like it was inside the stand with me. The sound was so loud, it echoed through the woods, and it wasn't just a crack. It was like a ripping, tearing kind of crack. And it was heavy, like something really big and solid broke. My heart jumped into my throat, I swear. I froze, instantly tense. The deer, they went rigid, heads up, ears pinned forward, staring into the woods. They knew something wasn't right, and I couldn't figure it out. See, I'm in this little box, facing the clearing. I can't just turn around easily. I'd have to shift in my seat, make noise, maybe spook whatever it was. Plus, the sound came from behind me and above me because of the stand being against the oak. So turning wouldn't even help much right away, and it was dead still. No wind, not a breeze. The leaves on the trees weren't even twitching, so it wasn't the wind. It wasn't a tree falling over, I'd know that sound. This was different. This was like, exactly like, a huge tree branch just snapping clean off and falling, but there was no wind. I stayed completely still, barely even breathing, listening. Everything went quiet again, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet as before. It was thick, heavy, like the air itself had changed. The deer were still frozen, tense as springs, just staring. They knew something was wrong, and that made my stomach clench. Animals have senses we don't. They pick up on things. I waited for what felt like forever, maybe just a few minutes, but it felt like an eternity. Nothing else happened. Just silence. That heavy, waiting silence. The doe and fawn slowly started to relax a tiny bit, but they were still on edge, taking small nibbles of grass, but always scanning the woods. They never fully went back to being relaxed and grazing like before the crack. The sun was properly setting now, the woods getting darker fast. I figured whatever made that noise was gone, or maybe still there, I didn't know. But staying in that stand in the dark after that, no way. I started to feel really uneasy. It wasn't just being startled by a loud noise. It was something else. Like the sound itself was wrong, if that makes any sense. Too loud, too sudden, too out of place. I slowly, carefully shifted in my seat, trying to make as little noise as possible. I got my rifle up, ready, just in case. I eased the little door on the front of the stand open, real slow. Looked out into the clearing. Nothing, just the deer, still jumpy. I slowly climbed down the ladder of the stand, keeping my rifle pointed towards where I heard the crack, which was basically right behind the stand. I got to the bottom, still watching, still listening. The deer finally bolted, just took off in a flash of white tails into the deeper woods. And then it was just me, alone in the twilight. I finally turned to look behind the stand, towards where the sound came from. It was thick woods back there, mostly oaks, just like the trees around my stand. It was getting pretty dim under the canopy, hard to see details. I stepped around the back of the stand, and I saw it. Or, I didn't see it. At first, I saw the branch. Lying on the ground, right behind my stand, was a branch. A big one. Definitely the size of a baseball bat, maybe even bigger. It was thick, solid, and it looked like it had just snapped right off a tree. Exactly like what it sounded like. Okay, branch fell, I thought. Weird it was so loud and with no wind, but trees drop branches, right? It happens. But then I looked closer at the branch, and at the tree above it. And that's when things started to get really weird. The branch wasn't oak. My stand is built against an oak tree. All the trees right around are oaks. This branch, it was different. I didn't know exactly what kind of tree it was from, but it wasn't oak. The bark was different, the wood was different. Darker, almost reddish-brown. Oak branches are lighter, more greyish, and the leaves that were still clinging to it were not oak leaves. They were longer, thinner, different shape altogether. I stood there, staring at this branch, getting this really uneasy feeling in my gut. Where the hell did this branch come from? There weren't any trees like that right there. The closest trees to my stand were all oaks. I looked around more, trying to see if maybe I was wrong, if there was some other kind of tree nearby I'd missed. But no, just oaks, for a good ways in every direction around my stand. Then I noticed something else. Just a little further back, maybe 10 feet from where the branch lay, was the property fence. Wire fence, posts and barbed wire. Marked the edge of my buddy's land, separated it from the land behind. And it was broken. Not just broken, like a post was knocked over. The wire itself was snapped. The top strand of barbed wire, the thickest one, was just severed. Clean break, like someone took a pair of bolt cutters to it. And it wasn't just snapped clean. It was bent and twisted, kind of pulled downwards, and hanging loose, touching the ground. And tangled in the broken wire, hanging off the barbs, were clumps of something dark. At first I thought it was mud or something, but as I got closer, I realized what it was. Hair. Thick, long, dark hair. Clumps of it matted together, tangled in the barbs, and not like deer hair. This was coarser, like animal hair, but different. And it was a weird color, not black exactly, but really dark brown, almost black in the fading light. I stood there, staring at the broken fence, the strange branch, the clumps of weird hair, and my mind just went blank. I mean, literally blank. I couldn't make sense of any of it. A branch that wasn't from around here just falls right behind my stand for no reason. A fence broken, like something big and strong just ripped right through it. And this hair. What the hell was this hair? I bent down closer to the hair, trying to see it better in the dim light. It was thick, really thick, and long. Some strands were easily 6, 7 inches long, and it had a kind of oily, musky smell to it. Not like deer, not like any animal I knew around here. It was just weird, wrong. I ran my hand along the broken fence, feeling the snapped wire. It took some serious force to break that wire like that. Barbed wire is tough stuff. And to just rip it down like that and tangle hair in it, it just didn't make any sense. What could have done that? I started to feel a real chill, not just from the cool evening air. This was a different kind of chill. Creepy. Something was seriously wrong here. This wasn't normal, not even close to normal. I've been in the woods my whole life, seen all kinds of stuff, heard weird noises, found dead animals, all that. But this felt different. This felt off, like something unnatural. My mind started racing, trying to come up with explanations, anything that would make sense. Maybe a bear? Bears can be strong, but bears don't usually break fences like that. And bear hair is different. Plus, bears aren't really active that late in the fall, getting ready for winter. And the branch? And the tree type? It just didn't fit. And then, the hair. That really got to me. The way it was tangled in the barbs, like whatever broke through the fence had forced its way through and left the hair behind, like it was snagged on the wire as it pushed through. Big clumps of it. And that smell, that weird, musky, oily smell. It was faint, but definitely there. I looked around again. The woods were getting darker, shadows stretching out. The silence was still there, heavy and thick, but now it felt watched, like something was watching me from the trees. I knew it was probably just my nerves, just my imagination running wild, but I couldn't shake the feeling. That feeling of being watched, of not being alone. I decided right then I was done. Hunting was over for the day. I needed to get out of there. This was too weird, too unsettling. I didn't like it, not one bit. I backed away slowly from the broken fence, keeping my rifle up and pointed towards the woods. I didn't know what I was expecting to see, but I wasn't taking any chances. I got back to my stand, grabbed my backpack and my bow. I'd brought my bow in case the rifle didn't work out, and started heading out of the woods, quickly, but not running. I didn't want to run, didn't want to show fear, even though I was scared. I walked fast, keeping to the trails, trying to retrace my steps back to where I'd parked my truck. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made me jump. I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning the trees, expecting to see something. I didn't even know what, but something. The woods felt different now, oppressive, darker than it should have been, even for twilight. And that silence, it was deafening. Usually at dusk you hear all kinds of night sounds starting up, crickets, owls, little animals moving around. But tonight there was nothing, just silence, thick, heavy, unnerving silence. I finally got back to my truck, practically jumped in, locked the doors, started the engine, put it in drive, and didn't look back. Just drove, fast. Got out of those woods as fast as I could. Back at home, I couldn't shake it. I kept thinking about the branch, the fence, the hair, that smell, the silence in the woods, that feeling of being watched. It just wouldn't leave my head. I tried to tell myself it was just a weird coincidence. Maybe a branch fell from a tree further away and rolled downhill. Maybe a deer somehow broke the fence. Maybe the hair was just from some random animal. But I didn't believe it. None of it fit. The next day I went back, during daylight, brought my buddy who owns the land, told him what happened, showed him the broken fence, the branch, the hair. He was freaked out too. He's been hunting these woods his whole life, and he said he'd never seen anything like it. We looked closer at the broken fence. There were no tracks around, no footprints, no sign of any animal struggle, just the broken wire, clean and sharp. We looked at the branch again. Still didn't recognize the tree type. It wasn't anything local that we could figure out. And the hair, we collected some of it, put it in a plastic bag. It was still tangled in the barbs. We walked around the area, trying to find the tree the branch might have come from. Couldn't find anything like it anywhere close by. It was like the branch just appeared there, out of nowhere. And the fence, it was like something big, heavy and strong just pushed right through it, snapping the wire and leaving hair behind. My buddy and I, we talked about it for hours that day. Tried to come up with any explanation. Couldn't find one that made any sense. We even took the hair to a wildlife expert, Guy at the state park. He looked at it under a microscope, said it was animal hair, but couldn't tell us exactly what kind of animal. Said it was unlike anything he'd seen around here. Just thick, coarse, dark and strange. He didn't know what to make of it either. We never figured it out, never found an answer. The broken fence, the weird branch, the hair, it's still a mystery. My buddy fixed the fence. We left the branch there, didn't want to touch it again. I haven't been back to that stand since then. I still hunt, but I go to different spots. Can't bring myself to go back to that place. I don't know what happened that day in the woods. I don't know what broke that branch, broke that fence, left that hair. But I know one thing for sure. It wasn't natural. It wasn't normal. It was something else. Something I can't explain and honestly don't really want to. Some things are better left unknown, you know. And that day in the woods, that's one of those things. It still creeps me out to think about it. Just that loud crack, the silence that followed, the broken fence, that weird hair. I hope I never find out what it was. Sometimes not knowing is better. But it's always there, in the back of my mind. What was in those woods that day? And what was watching me from the trees? I still don't have a clue, and that's the part that really gets to you, isn't it? The not knowing.